Hi, Lee Clements here for NCIS Reports in the Field. Well, it's been a month or so since I released anything on the YouTube channel and the podcast. But that's because Kathy and I took a well-deserved vacation trip to Italy to visit some old friends from our time there and just kind of drive around the countryside. We rented a car and just drove around the countryside, from town to town, and just visited so many towns that we'd never been to before in Italy. And it just was wonderful. And so we were able to go from the Adriatic to the Tyrrhenian Sea, from Rome to Perugia to Città di Castello to Ancona, all over the La Marche region, the Umbria region, and some of the Tuscany region. But we also went down to our Bella Napoli, which was still one of our favorite places in Italy. So much energy there, so much passion by the people, and our friends. A lot of friends were there. So excited about being back here to do the podcast and do the YouTube channel. Today, we have John Wagner coming in to talk to you, former Executive Assistant Director for the Pacific region. John is a good friend from the old days. He and I were in the same basic class, along with so many great leaders, CI 908. John is going to tell you amazing story of amazing tales of his career, starting with the time when he was doing narcotics in the amazing office of Long Beach in California, all the way to his time as the Executive Assistant Director of the Pacific region, where he kind of controlled half the world. So John is here today. I hope you enjoy this podcast. Please like, subscribe, leave your comments down below, and I can't thank you enough for watching this show and leaving your comments. It was great to serve with many of you. It was great to see some of the younger agents who are coming in the organization now, and how smart and intelligent they are, and how much passion that they have for the job now, as much as I had for when I came in. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. I hope you are all doing well. And please leave your comments down below. I love hearing from you. And it makes the show better. So with that said, here's our guest, Special Agent John Wagner. John Wagner began his career with NCIS in 1989 after working with the Hughes Aircraft Company in Los Angeles, California. Mr. Wagner's first assignment was at the Long Beach, California Resident Agency. He served in a variety of organizational assignments in mission areas, both with the United States and overseas, including 2 high-intensity drug trafficking area task forces prior to becoming a supervisory special agent. He was assigned to the HIDTA Task Force, Los Angeles, California Drug Intelligence Group from 1992 to 93. He was assigned to the Enforcement Group in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands Task Force, HIDTA Task Force in Ferrado. I hope I pronounced that right, John. Puerto Rico in 1996 to 1999. He completed 2 SSA assignments, that's supervisory special agent assignments, at the NCIS resident agencies at Camp Pendleton and at Guam. From 2003 to 2008, he served as the resident agent in charge of the Force Protection Attachment at the U.S. Embassy in Panama, where he provided counterintelligence support to force protection of all transiting Department of Defense assets and personnel in and through Panama. He deployed to Baghdad, Iraq from 2007 to 2008, January 2008, where he served as the Deputy Director of the Multinational Forces Iraq Strategic Counterintelligence Directorate, the SCID. In 2008, he was promoted to GS-15 and assigned to the NCIS headquarters as the Deputy Assistant Director for Criminal Investigations and Operations. He was responsible for programmatic oversight of all criminal investigations and operations and transnational crimes initiatives within NCIS. He developed the concept of operations for the NCIS counter-piracy and counter-transnational organized crime programs. He served as the special agent in charge of the Washington, D.C. field office from 2010 to 2012, where he was responsible for counterintelligence, counterterrorism, economic crimes, and general criminal investigations and operations at the National Capital Region. Mr. Wagner has received numerous awards and honors, including the International Narcotics Officer Association Agency Award. He was a recipient of the Joint Civilian Service Commendation Award, Iraqi Campaign Medal, Global War on Terror Medal, and the NCIS Expeditionary Medal for his deployment to Baghdad in 2007 and 8. His professional affiliations include the California Narcotics Officers Association lifetime member and the International Association Chiefs of Police. I want to welcome John Wagner, retired Executive Assistant Director, Pacific Region, to the show today. John, it's great to see you, man.
Good morning, Barry Lee. Probably one of the only few people that call you that.
You are the only one that calls me, but that's okay because that's my name. I used to always tell people, Barry, the last person that called me that was my grandmother. She died in 1970. So
it's really a pleasure to talk with you, Lee. For those listening, Barry, Lee, and I go back almost 35 years. I was thinking about this. We were Fletchley classmates. And as I look at how much time has gone by, I realize that, Lee, I've known you longer than I've known my wife and kids.
I don't know if that's a good thing, John.
Well, I think it is, because that was, to me, the bright spot of our time with NIS and later NCIS is the people. The mission was phenomenal, but it was really the people that made it a special place.
It sure was.
Continues into retirement.
It sure was. It started in CI 908.
That's right.
Had so many phenomenal graduates from that class.
Absolutely.
It went on to leadership in the organization. It was just a great time. And you just had a fantastic career. And we're going to talk about that today. I'm excited about having you on the course, on the show. So tell me a little bit about yourself as far as where you grew up and about your parents, and then how you got into NCIS.
Yeah. Happy to go back that far. So I'm a native of Los Angeles. I was born in Inglewood, California, which is now home of the Rams and the Chargers, SoFi Stadium. So it's a small suburb.
Chargers.
I know. Good. We'll have to remember that from Mr. Ridley. That's his team, right?
That's
but
right.
So that was home. My mom and dad both worked in aerospace, and they lived in Westchester, which is right near the airport. So I was born in that area, and then they moved to a small city a few miles away, Carson, California, and that's essentially where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And I was there my whole life. Went through Catholic school, public school, then Catholic school, and then off to college. Only child. Worked my way through school at a grocery store, and that was a very good place to start, because in those days they had a union and made very good money, and it got me through college. And fun fact, when I started with NIS, I took a pay cut.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, because working at a grocery store teaches you world-class customer service.
Yes.
And you can take that a long way in our organization. I know that we have what we've always called, I think as young as many of us used to hate the term, we serve our customer.
Right.
We were like, what? But no, we really do. We Navy and the Marine Corps, they are our customers, and you do get that world-class customer service with the bases. And I'm sure in the supermarket. My son started in the supermarket as well, and he used to say that the work that he does today, recruiting for a university, is started with the world-class customer service that he got working at a grocery store.
It's a phenomenal experience, and the neighborhood kids, we all kind of worked there if we were fortunate to get in. And, I ended up, in high school playing sports, played football, baseball, did track, but I really gravitated towards football and baseball. Those were my fun sports. Got out of high school in 1983. And did my first year at Cal State Dominguez Hills undeclared. That was the first time I actually heard of NIS. So that'll lead into how I was in the student union one day, and I saw a flyer for Naval Investigative Service, and I read the description, and it was pretty intriguing. And so I kind of bookmarked that. But being a freshman, not knowing what I wanted to do, I continued on, joined the Army Reserve, took a year off of college, did that, and then came back, went to a junior college, got my AA for 1 year, and then was fortunate to get accepted into USC. So I did my last 2 years there.
Which is a phenomenal program. International studies, right?
International relations, right.
I'm sorry. Relations.
But same thing essentially. And I was considering going to law school. And, at the time working in the grocery store, I'd switched over to the graveyard shift because there was a night differential. So that gave me extra tuition money. I lived with my parents And, it was either work or school or studying. There wasn't really much other activity in those last couple of years of college, but it was just a phenomenal program. They had world-class faculty. I had applied to a couple of law schools. I took the LSAT, got accepted to 2 ABA schools, and was on my way there. And it was just a grind working and going to school. And I wasn't certain I wanted to be an attorney. So one day, as I was driving to school, I'd go up Figueroa because I lived south of the campus, and I would avoid the freeway because it was horrible traffic. So one day I'm driving through South Central LA, and I saw an LAPD car, and it car stop. It's early morning, and they had some guys on the side. What they do, right? They're sitting on the curb, and I'm looking over there, and I was like, that looks like a pretty interesting job.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun, right? And so I kind of re-examined what my career path. Went over to the career center and started looking around, and this is where I saw another flyer for NIS, which I thought was interesting, and it had Sherry Rostada's card on it. And so now I'm getting close to graduation. Well, I was a junior at the time, but trying to plan, and the career day, I figured, well, now that I get the degree and I'm learning the requirements, maybe I got to apply to FBI, maybe, DEA or ATF Secret Service. And NIS at the time was one of the smaller agencies. So Sherry actually came to the school.
Too. I mean, you didn't hear a lot about them.
Right. Yeah. I just wanted to get a job, and so I actually talked with Sherry. She came down to the school for a career day, and she was just so gracious. She gives me her card, and she gives me the SF-171, and she's like, "Where do you live?" And I tell her, and she's like, "Yeah, that's only like 15 minutes from Long Beach Naval Station. You know where that's at?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." She's like, "Okay, I want you to type this application out, and when you've got it typed out, bring it down to me, and I'll take a look at it, and I'll send it from the office if everything looks good." And she said, "Don't handwrite it. Make it look professional." And I remembered that. So, this was back before the internet. Had my typewriter, typed it out, gave her a call. She got me onto the base, and I hand delivered the application to her. She said, "This looks good. I'll go ahead and send it in from here. And then I'll let you know when headquarters receives it." And she kind of talked to me about the hiring process, all of that. So, of course, I go back and I'm talking to my parents about this, and my dad, who's an executive at Hughes Aircraft, he's like, "What are you going to do? What is this? You want to work for the government? I thought you were going to law school." And I was like, "Well, Dad, I kind of told him what my thought process was." He was still concerned, but he said, "That's what you're interested in. That makes sense." And then I think the closer for him is I said, "Dad, if it doesn't work out and I don't like it, I can always go back to law school." He's like, "Okay, I like it." And, and I got the call when I was still in school. I was a senior. And, the first interview was with Dave Swindle. He was the SAC in Long Beach. Sure. And, it's funny because he's looking over my resume and my grade transcripts, and he's like, "John," he said, "it's interesting. You got good grades. You seem to be focused on that." He said, "But I'm a little concerned. You don't have any extracurricular activities. I mean, you're not involved in anything else." And I said, "Well, Mr. Swindle, I'm working my way through school." He put his pen down and he said, "Excuse me?" I said, "Yeah, I'm working my way through school. I live with my mom and dad. I work extra hours during the summer when I don't have classes, and my parents cover the Delta on it, And he's like, "Oh, that's impressive." And then we continued the conversation, and then I think probably that a month or so later, I got the call for the screening interview, the water board, right?
The infamous boards,
right? Yeah,
we all love to talk about.
Yeah. So my board was at Naval Air Station Miramar, and of course that's post Top Gun, right? It was 1988, and I walk into the NISRA, and I tell them I'm there. Of course, I'm nervous. I made the 1.5 hour drive down from LA. And, I come into the room, and I've got the 3 agents there. 3 agents, 2 of the 3 I remember. One was Ernie Simon, the other one was Ted Hicks, and I don't recall the third person. And Ernie immediately after we do the meet and greet and sit down, and I'm, my tie's tied, I'm sweating. He's like, "Hey, I see in your application you went to Bishop Montgomery High School."
Mm-hmm.
He's like, "Yes, sir." He said, "Did you play football?" It's like, "Yes, sir." He said, "Did you play Sarah High School when you were there?" I was like, "Yes, we did." "And who won?" I said, "We did." And he's like, "I went to Sarah High School." So he busted my chops for about, 3-4 minutes. And it was wonderful because it was an icebreaker. And then it put me at ease. I had that nervous energy that just, brought me down. And then, we had a wonderful interview, a lot of questions back and forth. And, took the break after about, it felt like an hour. It's probably 45 minutes, maybe an hour. And then, came back in for the second part, and it really just flew along in the second part. And
what type of questions did you get on that screening board? Because it's always interesting what questions you get. Mine were certainly something.
Well, they talked about mobility. Are you, willing to go anywhere that you need to go? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I said, in fact, that's one of the draws for me, is I lived in one place my whole life, and I want to see the world. And I'm interested in, the international relations that kind of that national security mission they had.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this is a pretty neat opportunity. I like to surf. I figure there's a Navy base, there's a coast, right? These are the things that are going through your mind as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old.
Yeah.
And, but, they asked, are you okay with, carrying a gun? Do you think you could, have to defend yourself if you had to? Would you be okay with seeing dead bodies? All of those standard law enforcement questions. And I said, yes, I mean, I'm interested in it. I don't know why I'm intrinsically drawn to it, but it sounds like a wonderful career, a diverse career, and a career you can make a difference and also have the opportunity to travel. And then I remember they always kind of closed with, well, do you have any questions of us? And I did, and one of my questions was, well, crime is kind of like a 24-hour thing. You talked a little bit about the duty agent thing. How does that work? And they explained it, and I was like, oh, okay, all right, that makes sense. And I had, I think, more tactical in the weeds questions about the ins and outs of the job.
Did you ask him when you get one of those sweet Dodge K cars to take home?
Yeah, I was like, I want one of the Furies, the 4-door Furies.
That's a Fury was my car, baby.
Yeah. But it was a really good interview, and they talked about, what NIS did for the Department of the Navy, the service that they provided. And, it felt good. And like I said, I really, I look back on that time and just Ernie, being so engaging, in the way he did that.
Sharp. He was a sharp guy, man.
Absolutely. And that was my first, besides Dave Swindle, those were my first experience with NCIS folks. But man, I think about that, and I was like, that was really cool of him to open like that. It was really thoughtful. So
Mr. Swindle ran my board, and Dave just messed with me for.
I mean, that means he likes you.
Yeah, he just messed with me the first, and he told me this afterwards. He just look, you after answering about 3 questions, I knew I was going to hire you, but right. But he said, I remember middle of, when we took that break and they were taking my fingerprints. I said, I don't think I'm going to get through this interview. I don't think I did very well.
Right.
And James goes, hey man, if I'm fingerprinting you, you're going to get hired. So
that's awesome.
Don't screw it up in the next 2 hours.
That's right. Yeah. Don't go in and have a breakdown.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, well, I was wearing a cotton suit. I was sweating. It was Memphis, so it's like a 99-degree day.
You and me both. Yeah, with that.
I knew that the rings of sweat were showing from my cheap blue cotton suit. So
that shows you wanted it, man. Right. So
exactly. So anyway, so you get hired. And after, did you go to 11 what's called 11 PH, which was
I did.
That was back in the days when we called them. We went by the Navy regions.
Right.
And the 11th region was the 11th Naval District was the San Diego kind of Los Angeles area. Yeah. So 11 PH, Port Hueneme.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Port Hueneme.
A legend, Harry Rogers, as your first SAC.
Yes. So I got the call in December of 1988. Ray Vaisa gave me the call. Oh, wow. And I talked to him, and I remember clearly I was standing in my parents' kitchen, and wall phone, He's like, hey, this is so-and-so from NCIS headquarters. Congratulations. We want to offer you the job. Want to see if you're still interested. And if so, we'll send you the formal letter. I was like, yes, absolutely. He said, we're thinking we'd like to assign you to San Diego. And I'm like, great. I mean, I've been willing to go anywhere, they said, but I was hoping to stay, somewhere in Southern California. And he's like, okay, well, I'll give you a call back tomorrow. We'll let you know. And then he did. He called the next day and he said, hey, instead of San Diego, we're going to assign you to Port Hueneme. Are you okay with that? I was like, yeah, absolutely. And I generally knew where Port Hueneme was. It was one county north of where I lived, up in Ventura County. I'd never, really been there, but I knew it's on the highway to Santa Barbara. So that was it. And then, Harry Rogers called shortly after that to introduce himself. And it was kind of coming up on that Christmas, New Year's break. So he's like, hey, I see you got your start date. I think it was like January 3rd, right? Was that first Monday
that was our start
after the holidays. And so we're excited to have you. I see you're local. If you'd like, we can arrange, somewhere for you to stay your first couple of weeks while you're checking in. I was like, yeah, that'd be great. He's like, if you have time, can you make the drive up? I'd like to meet you. I was like, yeah, absolutely. So set an appointment up with him. He gave me directions and took me right to the sun-kissed gate and met me there. And, he had I think it was like a Ford Taurus, and got me in the gate and went to the Nizra and introduced me around. And it was just wonderful. Great people. Gary Jacobs was my ASAC. Got to meet Gary, whose son Aaron is now an agent with us. It was a phenomenal first 2 weeks, just hanging out in the office. After that, Kirk Downs was there, Leslie Wolf, now Galicki, Debbie Winslow, Ron Jansen.
Hey man, that was a superstar lineup.
Oh, it was a great team. And, it was a great learning experience for me too. So what had happened was in Hueneme there, I first learned about source work with Gary. Gary had this shit hot informant who was doing all kinds of dope deals. And I thought this was just the best thing ever. And so he introduced me to that. And, and I remember too, Harry was a great teacher. When you come back from, I don't know how you were, when I came back from Fletcher, I was like, okay, I got this gun, this badge, this credential. I don't really feel like I know jack shit, and Harry, when he met me, the first Monday after Fletzy, he's like, hey, we've got some cases in your box. We're going to start you out with some leads and some easier things. And in time, we'll expose you to different things. And I'm like, fantastic. And, he taught me the ropes. Gary taught me the ropes, Kirk, Leslie, Debbie, Ron. I mean, they would all pitch in. So it was before we had a formal FTA program, but, with that, and we'll go back to Fletzy in a minute, but I was there for several months. So basically got out. We graduated in April. Remember 89. And then Tom, Holly, and I stayed for the PT instructor's course. And for another, So we were there one extra month, and we moved from the motel onto the facility there. But Motel 6, right? And on Jessup, I think it was like in Jessup, Georgia, I think was the city it was in. Yeah. So, but what happened is, now I'll back up and go to Fletzy. So we get off the bus, right, from Jacksonville Airport, and people kind of came and waved. Some people drove, some people flew, and I was one of the ones that flew, obviously. And there's a bunch of us in the lobby. I think we did like some sort of in-dock at Fletzy, if I recall. We got our IDs and all of that, and then they all took us over to the motel on the bus. And the reason why is because Fletzy was full. Border Patrol was hiring. They were in a huge push, and there was no lodging at Fletzy. So we all kind of mill around. And I got to talking with Ron Safel, who ended up being my roommate. And, the first thing, hey, who are you? Where are you from? Ron tells me, oh, I'm from LA. I was like, what part? And he's like, oh, you probably don't know. And I was like, well, I'm from LA too. What part? And he says, oh, I'm from Carson. I was like, yeah, so am I. So he's like, hey, you want a room? I was like, yeah, absolutely. So we just paired up and we became roommates. And he was a couple of years ahead of me. Went to one of the public high. He graduated from one of the public high schools there, and it's just a lifelong friendship, right? And then I look at all of the people in our class, Lee. That's where I met you. Dave Racer, Drake Shaw. I mean, Dwayne Beecham, Mike Marks, Diane Ibsen, right? All of these wonderful people
phenomenal.
Absolutely. What a great class we had. And then I remember, W, so I'm sitting in the back. It's Wagner, it's Warshawski, it's Worth, and then Zambetti. So we had that back row lined up.
I remember that because I would look back there. I was on the front row.
Yeah,
I didn't want to be there, but I was looking in the back. I was like, you guys seem very relaxed back there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Boy, what a fun experience, and I look at the diversity of backgrounds in our class. We had former police officers, we had former military officers, we had a couple of people right out of college like me and you. And I think Ben Nivens, if I remember correctly, I think he was like a hospital administrator. Sam Worth was a school teacher before he came on. I mean,
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think he taught biology, right? So, I mean, what a great group. Randy Hughes. Remember we played basketball with Randy? He was smooth, man. That guy was smooth.
Oh yeah.
So this comes into how I got to Port Hueneme. So when we're at FLETC the next day and we had to stand up and this is who I am. This is where I'm going. Randy comes to me after the break and he's like, "Hey, I want to shake your hand." I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You saved me. I was on my way to Port Hueneme. I got 5 kids." When I Googled, they didn't have Google. When I did some research and I found out how expensive it was there, I told them I can't go there. And they said, "Okay, hang on. We'll see what we can do." At the time I'm single, didn't have any kids.
Yeah.
And that's when they called me back and said, "Hey, will you go to Port Hueneme?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "So if you didn't take that, I'd be on welfare right now."
Well, here's the thing about that class. It's like when I asked them and said, "Hey, I'm from Birmingham, Alabama." I'm like, "Sir, where I can get
San
to
Diego.
one of the bases on the East Coast or South?" They go, "Nope." It was like literally key thing. Goes, "Nope. It's San Diego or nothing." I said, "I guess San Diego then," which was the greatest thing that ever happened.
Absolutely.
But it was funny because when we got there, out of the 48 people that were going to into the agency, I think like 8 of us went to California.
Yes.
Everybody else was on the East Coast.
Right. No,
East Coast, 8 West Coast.
Yeah, I tell you, and I look back on that. It's Dave Racer went to Pendleton, because Dave was a San Clemente police officer. San Clemente, he was San Clemente PD, right where I live now, and he was LA County Sheriff before that, which I'll touch on later when we get to the DC story. Yeah. Talk about different paths intersecting. Mm-hmm. But man, what a great class we had. I remember Doc Devine. He had his PhD doctorate, the book he published. Came when we were at FLETC. He's got all these boxes sent to him. I'm like, damn, how did I get hired with this group? Master's degrees, PhDs, and here I am, just like Well, you talked about Hughes Aircraft in the beginning. That was basically a summer job that I got when I after I graduated college. I decided I got to quit this supermarket job because if not, the money's too good. I will never leave. Yeah. And so I quit and I was able to get a summer job at Hughes and I basically, stayed there until I got
same way. I was pitching shoplifters, basically like Nordstrom. So it was a new experience for me as well.
Yeah. But, and then I was able to take a no cost to Long Beach after about 4 or 5 months at Port Hueneme because we had they rehired another agent he was with us and then he left to go to Oxnard PD and then he wanted to come back, and because he had a family there, he's like, hey, they offered him Long Beach. So again, kind of the Randy Hughes story. They're like, hey, well, if you're willing to go to Long Beach, we'll hire. I was like, yeah, no problem. And that worked out better for me because I wanted to go to a bigger office anyway. Sure. And I heard about all the kick-ass things they were doing in Long Beach at the time. So I'm like, put me in, coach. And I went back, and then Dave was my SAC at that time. But and I'll come back to the Port Hueneme thing later when we get to my next duty station in Panama, because I had moved into an office where an agent had just recently resigned, and so I kind of inherited all of her infrastructure, right, her files and all of that, and it was pretty organized.
This 1, 2, and 3,
right? Yep, that's right. And her in the filing cabinet, you know, the different forms and all of that. So.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So you so you basically go to Long Beach, working for Dave Swindle. Talk about some of the cases that you worked there that were that kind of formulate your thought process as a criminal investigator.
Well, so I was fortunate. They had an op squad in Long Beach, and at the time, Ridley was on it. Clark Leininger, you remember Clark?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So Clark had come up from San Diego. He took that, I think, a no cost because he started, I think, at North Island. John,
sure did.
Yeah, John Davies was the SAC there. I got a John Davies story too.
We all have John Davies.
I got tons of stuff. I love that guy.
You're in San Diego. You have a John Davies story.
I was not on his good list. It's not a good John Davies.
I think all of us were not on his good list.
But it ends up being a great story, 15 years later, right? So so Rid and Leininger were on the op squad, and we were in the small office, three of us, and it was great. That's when I learned about CNOA. I joined CNOA, and CNOA had a
great training,
the best training ever, and that's really where I got my foundation of learning the nuts and bolts of an investigation, and that would apply.
CNOA stands for California Narcotics Officers Association.
Yep, and just top flight training. They had a training seminar every other month at the Long Beach City council chambers, and it was excellent. Search warrant writing, informant handling, undercover operations, tactical planning. They had a course called Street Development where they would actually walk through how dope is packaged, how it's, measured, all of these things if you were going to be an undercover, and, because most cops didn't grow up as dopers, right? We kind of lived through our informants, and, court testimony, surveillance operations, tactical training. They'd take us to the sheriff's department where they had the Hogan's Alley with the laser. I mean, this is like, 1991, 92, and this was newer technology. They didn't even have that at FLETC when you and I went through.
Sure. Right.
So it was a learning experience, networking. And, as I'd get cases going, we had an agreement with the district attorney's office in Long Beach at the courthouse. That's where most of our cases went. They're like, hey, we like you guys. We know you're not state peace officers, but we want you to keep bringing cases to us. And so at that time in the early 90s, most of the police departments were chasing the money. So their dope squads would kind of connect up with the major violator crews, either in like LA City, LA County, or the DEA task forces. And then they do the asset sharing, So there was really little appetite for their dope crews to work street cases, and that's where we came in, and we were slaying it with our Navy people who get they pop positive. We would go in and give them the pitch, and that was back before it was zero tolerance. So we could get people out of
and have the 2-week time frame.
Absolutely
gone 2 weeks.
Right. And it was wonderful because all of the skills and the knowledge I obtained from CNOA helped me, because we got it at FLETC, right? But it was like drinking from a fire hose there.
Sure.
And so when I really came to understand the legal protections that you had and legal advantages you had using an informant, the advantages of having a search warrant versus consent when you get to court, and who has the burden of proof. Yep. I was like, wow, it's phenomenal, and all the protections that informants had. And then for us, we were in a great position because our informants were basically people who weren't going to stay in the neighborhood. So if we could say, hey, we'll get you a transfer, if number one, never promise anything, right?
Yeah,
but
sure.
If you work for me and you're productive, I'll let your CO know, we'll let the judge know, and they'll decide.
Yeah.
But my pitch would be, I've never seen anybody worse off who did something for us and was productive get screwed. Right. In fact, I've seen pretty good deals. I can't promise you anything now. And that would usually be enough. Either that or they get OTH'd or BCD and they're out. So
they probably treat them better than they're being treated on their ship.
Absolutely. And what I found too, in most instances, many of the informants who were in Long Beach, and maybe you saw this in San Diego, they really didn't want to be there. They wanted to be somewhere else.
Yeah, sure.
And that was also a real valuable incentive that we had. And I used that throughout my career to recruit these informants. But, I remember one case we had was CNOA had a training seminar on permissive searches, knock and talks, and they went through the whole thing. I learned a lot of good stuff. And, essentially, if you don't have anything else at your last resort, go for it. So we got a call one day from an anonymous person that said, hey, there's this house at Navy Housing. They've got small kids, and there's meth in the house right now. I was in the house last night. They were having a party. There's a good amount of meth in there, and I'm concerned for the well-being of these kids. And I'm not trying to, be a saint, but I'm worried. So they gave us the name, gave us the address. I do some quick checks. Turns out Pat Hausman had a child abuse case on the mom, who's a Navy wife. So I talked to Pat, and I was like, hey, this is what we got. And she's like, oh man, I'm worried about those kids. We've had CPS involved, and so far we haven't really been able to pin anything. And I think this is a great opportunity. So I was like, okay, well, let's go. I said, Pat, you know her. And one of the things I learned in the CNOA thing is like, look, if you're going to do a consent search, make sure your weapons are not exposed. You don't want them to be able to say they were coerced or they were scared. And that's why they gave consent, because you'll get everything thrown out. So I was like, here's what I recommend, Pat. And they said, also find the smallest, most, non-threatening person on your team to do this. So I was like, Pat, could you knock on the door? We'll be with you. Can you ask her, for consent? Just here's the pitch. Hey, we're here. We understand there may be some methamphetamine in the house. We'd like to come in and search. And the informant told me exactly where it was in the bedroom where it was hidden. And it was pretty well hidden. So she felt confident. Yeah, come on in. And, we did this perfunctory, thank you very much. Have a seat here. Okay to go into the bedroom. You want to send somebody? Yep. No, go ahead. And we wait around. We knew exactly where it was. Wait about 5 minutes, and then, find it, take the picture,
the cabinet,
sees it, right? Come out with a little baggie, and she just went pale. So we arrested her. Was able to get CPS involved in that and take care of the kids. But those are things. Was it a big case? Maybe it was like 6-7 grams of meth, but it had an impact. For these kids. And I remember the caller was a female. She called back the next day, and I'd asked her when she called the first day, say, can you give me your name? She's like, I don't want to be involved. I don't want to give you my name. I was like, no problem. Understood. So she called back and she said, hey, I wanted to thank you for taking action so quickly, because of course word spread like wildfire, and there were a lot of people at that party. So she didn't know who snitched her off. And I said, ma'am, I know you didn't want to identify yourself, but I'm very thankful that you called. I think this was an important case. And if you're willing, I said, you don't have to tell me who we are. You say, no, if you're willing, me and my colleagues, we'd like to maybe meet with you, buy you lunch and just talk. And she's like, yeah, okay. I'd be willing to do that. So we set up a meeting in a restaurant in Long Beach, and we ended up recruiting her as a CW. Mm-hmm. And man, she just killed it. Absolutely killed it, because that environment. Then you had the clubs on base, you had the dependent wives were partying. It was just, there was so much. Coke was dead. That was like the Pulp Fiction scene, man. No, Coke is dead. It wasn't heroin, yeah. It was meth, right? And it was just everywhere. We joked that probably 80% of the ships at the naval station, they weren't burning oil, they were burning meth. Yeah. And the other thing we saw is that it was usually the engineering departments that were getting hit hard with the meth use, because they were working the longest hours. They were shutting the ship down when it came off of their ops, and they were the first ones on to get it going again, and it was long hours. So a lot of people got hooked on it that way. But there were just so many good cases, and we were running the streets because the Long Beach PD they just didn't have the bandwidth. And when we go out there, the patrol officers, we'd always call for patrol support, when we were going to do a warrant. We were getting our own state paper. We had our own entry team, and we were just crushing it, man. And it was just like case after case after case. It was phenomenal, man.
John, I from working those dope cases, I worked with them down in San Diego, and you were working them up in Long Beach. Sometimes, it was interesting to see the police officers, the detectives that we worked with in dope cases. With me, it was San Diego County or San Diego City. Yeah. And they were just blown away by what could happen to a sailor
Right.
who was caught doing just the quarter gram of methamphetamine to purchase, to buy, or an 8-ball.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a couple of detectives to a captain's mast one time because the ship didn't have time to leave them for prosecution. They were going off to Desert Storm.
Right.
That hadn't started yet. And so we go to captain's mast, and they ran this sailor through the mill, shaved his head, fixed his uniform, all this other stuff. The two detectives are standing there and they're going, well, he got more than what he'd gotten out in town. And
absolutely.
He goes, we'll do this anytime with you guys. So it was interesting working those dope cases because we didn't with a lot of serious levels, the pound, that would be the task forces that would get all those big, cases, but just those cases where we're buying on the streets, working with the county, working with the city, that was a phenomenal help to them. I know.
Absolutely.
Well, it's great working with them.
And our sailors were living out there, and that's where they were buying the dope. And that's where I get back to what a perfect opportunity. So you've got a sailor who's not from San Diego or Long Beach, but they're living there. They're doing these deals, with bad guys, and some of them, at least in our area, some of them were righteous bad guys.
Sure.
And nobody's going to question them because they're in the Navy. They've been buying.
They're in the Navy uniform. We used to send the truck out with a Navy uniform. Dr. Divine, it'd have these operations. We'd run into a motel and we're buying dope out of the motel. And we
absolutely
tell all the dopers.
Yep. And, and it was great. And then, when you got onto something good, we'd introduce the undercover, one of us would start doing the deals. Now we're up. But this is where we learned how to use surveillance, how to, tie people to locations. We'd make a buy in a bar. And because we had a good surveillance team, we'd follow the bad guy back to his or her house or apartment. Now we're tying them to a place. Yeah. Now I can start working the paper. Now I get DMV. I'm running it. Look at his picture. Yep, that's the guy that delivered the dope to my guy. So now I'm working 2 or 3 levels away where I never had a hand-to-hand with a guy, but because we, through surveillance, were able to see that crook deliver to the guy that did the hand-to-hand with us, tie him back to a location. Now we're playing chess, not checkers. I'm telling you, it was just fun stuff. And
I could say that, my whole career after that, going into CI and working double agent operations was based on the work that I did in narcotics.
Ops are ops.
Ops are ops.
Yeah.
And just for the new agents out there and John has been talking about this and he's advocated for it. And I hope that you guys, if you're not a member of the California Narcotics Officers Association, you're in San Diego,
join
in the California area, you need to be a part of that group. That group is phenomenal. And I hope that you'll join it. I was a member. I'm not a lifetime member because I left California, but John is a lifetime member and I know that he advocates for that group and you should join it if you can. So.
Absolutely. So those were kind of the formative years. And the other thing I'll say too, and this is bled over to, all disciplines and it helped me as a leader. We have tools in our toolboxes as investigators. We've got surveillance, we've got forensics. Now we've got cyber, what I think people neglect to realize is human beings are also a tool. Informants are a police tool. They're not our friends. They're not our colleagues. They're a police tool. That doesn't mean we disrespect them, but we need to realize that. But out of all the tools in our investigative kit, that is the most valuable tool, the most valuable tool. We've got audits, we've got all kinds of things. So I'll go back to that female informant for a moment. We had the next manager came to us in Long Beach and said, hey, I've got a $200,000 loss when we did our annual inventory. And I don't know where this loss is coming from. We've looked at it upside down. We've had auditors come in. We can't figure it out. And, we sat and we talked about some different theories that he had. He's like, man, the only thing I can think it's the high value cage where, they have like jewelry and other expensive items that come in. But when he walked me through the process, it's very controlled. And I was like, from what you're saying, it makes sense for the dollar amount, but the way you're controlling that, it just doesn't seem feasible. I said, what I'd like to do, if you're amenable to it, I've got an informant. If we can get her a position there, maybe she'll figure it out. And it was this CW that I told you about. So we worked it out, got her a job there. And I'm not kidding you, Lee. In less than a work week, she figured it out. And she made friends with the people in the back room. and what was happening. And I knew this from working in the supermarket because we had shipping and receiving. I knew how the goods flowed. I knew how we did inventory. I know how we did orders. She said what they do, because they're involved in shipping and receiving, and they're also involved in what's going on the floor. The floor managers will come and say, okay, I need, 15 Sony Trinitron TVs. We're dating ourselves, right, with the Sony Trinitron. And he said, so, the electronics person would make the request. This is what I need to order. Well, the person who is doing the ordering would order 15 Trinitrons. Boom, got it. And then he'd do a separate order, 5 Trinitrons. So instead of 15 Trinitrons coming in, 20 would come in. And he had 2 separate sets of bills because they were 2 separate orders. So he'd take the 15 Trinitrons, go to the electronics manager. Here's your 15 Trinitrons. Press real hard on these bills, and you're good to go. And then he'd take those other 5 Trinitrons, keep the orders, go out to the yard, when it was after hours, and move those TVs or whatever the items were into a truck trailer. And then after work, they bring their van around, unload the trailer, and take it home.
Wow.
All in less than a week, we figured this out. So what do? We set up surveillance. It goes according to plan, exactly like she told us. Mm-hmm. Follow them back to their house. Where do they live? They live in Carson, making my hometown proud. So based on this, we now have enough information to get what? A search warrant. Sure. So we write a search warrant, go talk to the DA. And we were in that issue too. We've got different jurisdictions, right? You got concurrent, and this was concurrent, and they decided to take it to state court. So the bottom line, we know when he's going to get a big delivery. We follow him home, get a caravan, hit the house, and he had just tens of thousands of dollars of electronics. And and he told us to pound sand, but what they were doing is they were fencing it, and again, that underscores the importance of having an informant. So I don't care if it's dope. I don't care if it's property. I don't care if it's, CI. Yeah. You have to have people telling you what's going on.
Yeah, sure.
Man. And it's just like, got it,
Mike Devine got me into a deal one night. We did the same kind of deal.
Yeah.
We decided he was just going to do a knock and talk on this house, see if the furniture was in this house that it's stolen for next. This guy's house was full of furniture. All in next. This is this is like 10 o'clock at night. So we're loading a truck up with furniture and taking it back and parking it in a lot and putting evidence tape on the doors.
Yeah.
They were like,
amazing.
Mike, how did you get me into this? Why am I doing hard labor for you?
And you're working all night, man. We've had several cases where we've had to rent trucks.
Oh
okay. I don't know how much time we got, but I'll tell you one last story. I had it was just a dope case. We were wrapping it up, right? We did the interview. I had one last guy to interview, because anytime you pull these guys in and then they give you 10 names, you got to interview 10 people. Right. So I pull this kid in and I give him the rights waiver for was it 112 Alpha? And and I'm like, and the guy, after I read him his rights, he visually sighs a sigh of relief. So I asked him the dope questions. No. I'm not going to waste a lot of time on it. So I put my pen down and I was like, now I want to get to the real subject.
Yeah. The
real reason why you're here. And he slumps over. He's like, okay, well, it started. I stole one toolbox off a ship that was in the shipyard. By the time I got the statement, I got 3 pages of all the crap he had stolen. And he was renting a house in Long Beach. All right, now we're going to go get it. Mm-hmm. We had to rent a truck. He stole a whole ship. It was insane. Absolutely insane. Even the garage and the deck of his garage was covered in that anti-static mats, when they do the construction and electrical work. I was like, that was like thousands of dollars alone right there. So it's like, you never know what's going to come your way, So he became an unwitting informant.
Thank you, man. Oh, that is funny, man. Well, that's the kind of cases we worked. That was, we talked about it before the interview. Yeah. In those days, we had a different, criteria for accepting cases.
Right.
With NIS, it was, $500 and above. So everything we were getting was
Right.
$500 a buck.
$505. You know who my best friend was in those days? Depreciation.
That's right. We literally pull out the depreciation guy and go, okay, it's a bicycle and we've got it. It would cost $1,000 2 years
It's worth
ago.
$12 now. Call CID.
Oh my goodness. Those were the days. Those wore suits too. So it was.
That's true. That's right.
Oh my Lord. Good times. Well, so you did all these great cases in Long Beach, but I mean, you obviously you get to GS-12.
Yeah.
Which was kind of our journeyman level that in those days.
We have people retiring as 12s, Lee.
Yeah, remember it was Terminal 12,
yeah,
right?
That's right. Yeah.
You know, Roy Nedrow told me in his interview he was a 12 for 8 years before, you know. He had no no sympathy for anybody going, when am I gonna be tested for GS-13, you know?
Is there any math on it?
Please, thank God, no. Anyway, so you make your GS-12, and so what is your next house after LA? You go to Panama. Did you go to Panama after LA?
I did. I went to Panama the first time. That was '93. I was there from '93 to '95, and so what happened? I mean, people lament the transfer process nowadays. So I was in Long Beach. They couldn't get people to come in. Wow. And I saw all my colleagues from our class, Naples, Singapore, Japan. I was putting in for transfers, at that 3-year mark. Nothing. Yeah. Nothing. So
even Hotel California.
That's right. And they're like, and that was the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
So I'm frustrated. And I was like, well, if I'm going to stay in California, I'm definitely not going to starve, because this is back before locality. So I'm like, okay. So I go to LA County Sheriff, start through the process, get a job offer, after going through all their things, and go in and give my 2-week notice. At that time, Dave Swindle had left, and Pete Anderson came in. He was the SAC, and Leon had just moved. So Leon was the CIA SAC when I was there. Charlie Moss was the Crim SAC, and Leon had just moved down to. He was the SAC at Panama. And anyway, so we got in touch, and I was like, "Hey, Leon, man, I just wanted to let you know I'm bailing, man." He's like, "What?" It's like, "Why? You're talk to me." So I told him what was going on. I was like, "Leon, they're not letting me out."
Yeah.
And when people would get transferred into Long Beach, you know what they would do? Oh, my kid has asthma. We can't go to LA. Or there was always something. Yep. And I'm like, well, screw that. I mean, I'll starve, And so he's like, well, hang on. Let me make some calls. Where do you want to go? I was like, man, I'll go anywhere. Yeah. And he's like, well, would you be willing to come to Panama? I was like, yeah, I'd love to, And, he's like, well, let me engage. I can't make any promises, but, I'm going to have some openings on the next cycle. And, and I've got a say in it. I was like, great. So that worked out. So I decided, okay. And I know and trusted Leon. So, it eventually worked out on the next cycle. I was able to get it, but, and this is where I say there are going to be complaints about anyone whenever they don't get what they want. And it's usually, I think in more current times, it's now because they want to stay somewhere and they need them to go somewhere else. But I couldn't get out, so
we were all in the same boat. I had to take an aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
And well, I was supposed to get Pensacola.
Right.
After the move, because that was that guaranteed transfer.
Right.
I'm at C and I get this little message. Hey, that the GN admin saying, cancel, transfer to 6, PA or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Canceled. I go, what? What? How did that happen? I mean, I'm like, I've been shanghaied.
The old dot matrix printer. We had some fun with those.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
They were easy to counterfeit.
On a ship, you had to climb all the way to the intel shack to get your messages, and I'm literally through the messages going, no, I don't care about that. What? And then who can I call? I can't call anybody because I'm at sea.
That's right. You're on a ship. I'm telling you. That's how I ended up getting Panama.
So but I mean, you were talking about Leon. So John mentions Leon. It's Leon Carroll, who's most notably known as a technical advisor for the NCIS TV show, and who has worked for NCIS the TV show longer than he did for NIS.
Yes,
but it tells a great story. His book Goes to Panama comes out in November.
Yes,
I'm wondering, are you a part of that book?
I don't know yet. I don't think so. But he, and in fact, I've read Ghost of Honolulu.
Great book.
And Leon, by the way, in the Wagner house, he's known as Uncle Leon because my kids have grown up with him. Yes, and he lives in San Pedro now, so he's relatively close. But so that's how I got the transfer. Not the right way to go about it, and that's what I'm saying, to the youngsters nowadays. It's like it wasn't always easy back then either, So there's always issues, and you kind of got to navigate the system and kind of make your way through it. But
that was about the time we were having serious money problems too.
Correct. That was during the Clinton years. Remember, we didn't hire for a long time. Yeah. But before we move on to Panama, I want to one last story about our time in Long Beach and San Diego, respectively, was Baker to Vegas. That was the first year we did Baker to Vegas. Yep. We came in 22nd place.
I have my cup upstairs.
I got mine in the garage, right on my ledge, and I also have the T-shirt. And I remember
I did the Baker to Vegas race and ran one of the legs in my annuitant time.
I love it.
So it was interesting because I was like, it just brought back memories.
Yeah.
Of the Amen leg. And
I tell you, so I did the Amen leg once. But I did, so I ran leg 6 on our first try. And I remember Deidre Robertson handed the baton off to me. I handed the baton off to Greg Bachman. And Greg, I don't know if you know, but Greg is, he was, and he might still be, as a triathlete.
Well, and Greg ran it with me.
His leg was straight uphill.
Yeah, he ran that leg because I ran 2 and 3 was up the hill.
Yeah.
I handed to Greg and he took off. I was like, God bless you, man.
I got in the van and it just started, darkness had fallen during my leg. And, I do the handoff and then I hop in the van. And, as we're cruising along, I'm looking, it's like, we're going uphill. His whole leg was uphill. I mean, how he managed that. But, back then we had such a great group of athletes, Rich Mebbs was the first leg, we had Charlie Moss,
Tom Hawley,
Gunner, Tom. Oh, I got another Tom Hawley story. Tom's freaking awesome, man.
Well, always tell Tom Hawley stories. Yeah. They're the best.
They are. Okay, so I'm going to segue real quick because this is a good one. I'll make it fast. So when we were at FLETC for the PT instructors course, it was a 2-week course. There was this dude from Customs, and he was like one of those dudes that you would think was a men's health fitness model. I mean, the dude was cut, the dude was athletic, and I remember part of our curriculum there, we had to do the PFA. So we're getting ready to do the 1.5 mile run. And he comes up to me and he's like, "Hey man, you look like you're fit. What's your time?" I give him my time. He's like, "Okay, cool." He says, "My goal, I'm going to break the FLETC record today. And will you pace me?" I'm like, "Dude, let me tell you, I hate running. I'm not a runner. I mean, I can run, but you see that guy over there? He's the guy you need to." Yeah. So I introduced Tom to this guy. And it was funny because he was such a shit eater. So Tom's like, "Yeah, no problem." Tom smoked him. Tom won the class, right? And it's funny. I'm talking to Tom afterwards. I was like, "Dude, what happened?" He's like, "Nothing, man. I ran my time. I was waiting for him to pass me. He never passed me. I looked behind. He's like, half a track behind me."
Tom was, yes. I got to tell you, I believe that Tom Hawley had some nerves cut or something because he felt no pain whatsoever. I mean,
amazing.
I went out and ran with him one time in San Francisco, and I'll never forget that run because it was hell on earth. I mean, it was like literally it was Castro Street, down hills, and he's running them like he's running on flat ground, and I'm struggling. And I was in those days I was a pretty good runner, but
you were a damn good runner, Lee. I remember you,
but not like Tom.
Well, and that was the whole thing. And another good runner was Gunner. He and Gunner were just fantastic runners. But I remember you at FLETC doing the agility. I was like, holy cow, man! It was like there was smoke. You were like a cartoon, man. Smoke on your heels.
That was about the only thing I could do. It's like everything else was a struggle for me.
And I will tell the audience real quickly. After I saw that, Lee told me, "Yeah, I played for Bear Bryant." I'm like, "What?" That's amazing. And after I saw the agility, I was like, he really did play at Alabama. So,
well, I didn't really play. I just practiced a lot.
But you made that's enough, man. So all right, now we go on.
Anyway, let's go on.
Yeah.
So let's get to Panama. Tell me about Panama, because that had to be a unique experience. We still have offices. We have an office in Panama, but
right.
What was it like then? Because this is right after Manuel Noriega.
Right on the heels of it. We still had the Panama Canal Zone, and we had a group down there. It was called Panama Jack Task Force, and it was a NCIS, OSI, Army, CID group that was basically just focused on dope trafficking. And the problem was it was and still is, it's a transshipment point. So with the DoD conveyances, you had Howard Air Force Base with the the AMC flights, or the MAC flights that we call them, and what would happen is we had a trend of many of the Spanish speaking service members, usually from Puerto Rico, Mexico, or other Latin countries where they were native speakers. They were frequently recruited by traffickers, because what would happen is the Colombians, when they would put their big loads together, most of the time they were paid in coke. So what they would do is they had an incentive to get the coke up into the States, but they couldn't send their coke with the load, because it's not, that wouldn't be there. As soon as they send it, it's not their coke, right? So what they would do is they would look to recruit, once they figured this out, service members, dependents. They were using the APO system to send it up to the States. We get hit from the dogs, or we'd have an informant, or people would try to get on MAC flights. And I mean, it was cool. I mean, we were used to working, grams and ounces in California. Now I'm working kilos and multi-kilos, but a kilo of coke in Panama at the time was like $1,000, because it was just so supply and demand. Right. It was all over the place. So, they would pay the dependent wives or the soldiers or sailors, $1,000, $2,000, that's good money to them. And all they need to do is get on a MAC flight and go. And they know it was pretty low risk, because there really weren't many inspections. But it was a very successul operation. And I had a great time. And then, of course, we'd also catch, general crimes cases, when you had the duty. And that's where when I got down there, so Mark Fox was the RAC. Ramon Quijano was one of the CIA guys.
Oh, great guy.
Bobby Hyatt was the ASAC. Dave Cannon was down there. And Jim Mulcrone started, and then Jeff Jenkins came in and replaced him. So, I mean, we had just a stellar office, man, stellar. And
so John, let me ask you a question about that. So when Mark comes in, I mean, we all have Mark Fox stories too.
Oh yes.
Mark and are good friends. And anywhere Mark went to, it was suits, it was all And I'll never forget, it's like, you guys must have been working these drug ops and stuff, and all of a sudden Mark comes in. Okay, everybody's going to start wearing suits now.
No. Mark is an operator. Yeah. So when I got in there, and I think I also mentioned Bob McSherry was there, Big Bob, right? Okay, so we had Big Bob and Little Bobby is what all our contacts called him. But no, Mark was he was probably the first supervisor, beyond really Gary Jacobs, who really understood it. So when he looked at what was going on, he's like, man, this is some phenomenal stuff, and he was fully supportive of it. So, it was jeans and t-shirt, the whole thing. Good. So, but it was just like shooting fish in a barrel. And I was fortunate because they sent me to language school before I got down there. I did 3 months in Mexico. So I had a working understanding of the language, and really came to learn it and hone it on that first tour. And it was great because I was able to, meet with CWs and deal directly with them. Same thing with my police counterparts, and speak Spanish, and not have to have somebody translate and be in the middle of that relationship. Sure, so great. It was just a great experience. I got to travel, all throughout the AOR. And then when they'd have, this was back obviously before Cole. So, ATFP was kind of more of, a different mission. And Dave Cannon did a very good job with that. So, Dave also spoke Spanish. He was a missionary, so his Spanish was fluent. And, he would put together these comprehensive country reports when you go down to do an advance, taught me how to do that. And so it was awesome. I would get to go down range, go to all these countries, check in with the embassy, meet the police, and there's one story that I was in Honduras because Unit 8 down there, they had a long-term deployment. So I did like a 2-week advance, came back, briefed everybody, and then went down with the deployment for about a month. But I'm in this bar on the beach, they had like little kiosks of like restaurants and bars. And there's this one kiosk, it's blasting the Rolling Stones. And I was like, well, that's a little different than all the rest of the music. So me and my colleague go in there and we check in. Turns out that a Brit owned it. He had the Spanish guy, his name was Jose, who was his cook. Yeah. And the food was just excellent. I mean, this cook, he wasn't a cook, he was a chef. He had just checked out and moved to Honduras, you know, and this will tie into another story later. Yeah. But so that was kind of our hang every evening. That's where we go have dinner. But it was just a wonderful opportunity. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to see the world, you know, and I went on so many different trips. I had to get pages added into my passport because the book ran out, you know, with the stamps. And I just absolutely loved every moment of it. And, you know, Bob, Big Bob was funny, you know, if you ever golfed with Bob, and you may have when you were at Lexi. It's always been an adventure. You know, he's throwing clubs, he's cursing at himself. But I remember, you know, and Bob, for those that don't know him, you know, his hair has been jet white, I think, since he was 22 years old.
Yeah, sure has.
So we lived at Fort Amador. We were going to walk on one day, and it was just me and Big Bob. So we met at the clubhouse and walk up to the first tee, and it's like maybe a Saturday morning, and there was this Zonian getting ready to tee off. He joined our, you know, foursome, two people we didn't know, and he's like, "Man, it's really good to see a father and son golfing together." And I was like, yeah, you know, it is. It's cool. I was like, "So, Dad, you're going to tee off first?" And he's like,
"Shut up." Well, I have a story about Panama about John Wagner. So I'm in headquarters. John was in Panama. I was at DCWA doing drug ops at the time, and the DC field office. I happened to be on Code 23 because I was getting an operation, trying to get an operation on board, and Joe Kennedy was the head of operations. Uh-huh. So you had to go through Joe at the 23 desk, and
AD.
And it was interesting because John had some type of operation going on, and there was some money that had been it was going to be fronted in this deal, and somehow I'm sure that Mark Fox was behind this too, because he was brilliant with these kind
Mark was in Panama with me. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So you call up and leave a message on Joe's phone about how the money got lost. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. So Pilar McMillan, I don't know if you remember her.
Oh yeah.
Pilar was there, and Nedra had just taken over as director. So, you know, talk about the CNOA work or training. One of the training classes we had was, you know, reverse things, how to do that, money flashes, how to do it safely, right? So we had a deal we were trying to do. It was a $100K deal. The Colombian was going back and forth, and you know, basically the premise of this group was using the military aircraft. So we had known the middleman, and the bottom line was like, well, hey, if you're getting this Coke, can you get us some? You know, and we wanted to buy the Coke, so we wanted to do a flash to tell them we were real. So what I did is I started engaging with Pilar. They gave the approval. They wired me the $100K, and what my op plan was I was going to take it and put the cash in a safe deposit box and do the flash in the bank.
Right,
safest place in the world to do a flash, right? Because no guns in there. Yeah, so sure. we did that. And the bad guy was salivating, but it was funny because Pilar's like, just whatever you do, don't lose the money. So I got it, Pilar. So of course, with that vulnerability hanging out there, we're like, well, let's have some fun with her. So, you know, we send her a message. Hey, and this is back before we had email. So get on the phone, leave her a voicemail. Hey, got some bad news. You know, we had a misstep with the money. We were on the way to the bank. You're not going to believe this. We were robbed, and it's gone. we left it.
You should have seen Joe Kennedy's face.
I didn't know Joe back then, right? I didn't realize he was the
Pilar's boss. He was Pilar's.
Yeah. And then of course we'll call Pilar back and say it was a joke. She's like, you had everybody spun up. And they had a good laugh about it, but I didn't realize
they'd already gone up to Nedro.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Oh my gosh. All I can say is what balls. I mean,
man. But I mean, it was just fun stuff.
Yeah,
but, again, just those tie-ins to how to do things safely was huge. We did other money flashes with less money, and they would be surprises. I'd be talking to a bad guy in a restaurant, and then one of my colleagues would come in, sit down, open up the gym bag, and flash him 10 grand in cash, and then the guy knows you're real. Now you can start talking business. Sure. And then they leave, and all of a sudden you've got those bona fides set. So it was just a fun time, real fun time.
So what happened? So you finished Panama.
Yeah.
What's your next stop?
Back to Port Hueneme, it turned out, and
you're not escaping California yet.
And that's all right, because California's home.
Yeah.
And so I came back to Port Hueneme at the time. Bob Bryan was the SAC. May he rest in peace. He's passed away. And it was cool. So, Dwight Clayton was back in the office. Dwight was the first person I met in Long Beach when I checked in that day. What a great guy. And I miss him dearly. He's like my brother.
He's passed away as well.
Yeah. And so James Reed was there, Jimmy Reed.
Yep.
Chris O'Gara was there, Tanis McLaughlin, and Mary Helen Burgess was our admin. Mm-hmm. And it was a good office, so coming in, nobody was, it was, just a standard smaller office. Not there wasn't really anybody doing anything proactive. So, I check in there, and I was like, hey, Bob, this is kind of funny. Bob's like, oh yeah, John, it's a great AOR. You got three counties that you're responsible for. And I'm just thinking, God, all I wanted to do was go back overseas. I was like, you're telling me I got 3 counties. So I was like, Bob, and I didn't say anything to him, but I was just depressed. I was like, I was traveling to different countries and doing all the fun stuff I wanted to do. Yeah. And now I'm like, so
you don't have any money, so we're going to bring you
exactly. So I snapped in and started doing some dope work, and it's funny too. I was thinking about this, again, as we're talking before we started, Lee. This was back when we still did 6Vs. Sure. I'm sure our current workforce doesn't know what a 6V is. Yeah. And I remember I had a 6V on a Saturday morning. Sailor comes in and he's like, yeah, my Acura was stolen. Some Acura. And again, this is 1995, right? Yeah. And so, so I take all the information, and then I was like, and this kid's kind of a street smarts kid. He's a big kid. He's from Washington State.
Yeah.
Bajan was his name. I won't use his last name. But he was a pretty dynamic young man. So after I fill out the form and I tell him what's going to happen, I was like, can I ask you something? How is it an E4 can afford an Acura? And then he starts kind of doing this, well, I got my side hustle. And I'm like, no, I don't know. Tell me about it, So he starts making some shit up. And anyway, and I like this kid. So I was like, well, you seem to have a good understanding of what's going on here. He's like, oh yeah. He's like, I know everything that's going on. I was like, huh. And everybody wants something, Lee. Mm-hmm. So my question to him is, hey, would you be willing to, do some work for me? Keep your eyes and ears open? No, man, there ain't no way I would be a snitch. No way at all. And I was like, well, let's talk about that. How do you like it here in Port Hueneme? He's like, I hate it. He said, I was deployed to Guam. I met my fiance there. All I want to do is get back to Guam. So bing. I was like, so, but John, let me ask you this. I know you said you'd never be an informant, never snitch on your colleagues over there in the battalion. What if I told you there was a way I could get you to Guam? Would you be willing to snitch? He's like, hell yes. So,
oh, geez.
That's how it works. So I signed him up, did the registration, always kept that registration paperwork in my folder, right? Declaration of cooperation,
Oh, yeah.
And, and I was like, okay, here's what I want you to do. And I figured we'd just do a reverse, because he was clean. He didn't have anything. So I knew. And I was like, look, dude, I said, I can't come out and guarantee I'm going to get you Guam, but I can say with a high level of probability you will get it. And I didn't lie to him. I said, I've been doing this for 6 years now. I've never seen anyone not get their first or second. And he's like, well, I don't have a second. I just want to go to Guam. I was like, okay, well, this is possibly your way in. He slayed it, man. Slayed it. Started setting up the deals, and again, we kept again, using the protocols, the thing I learned at CNOA, we don't want to push this. We just put it out there and see who takes the bait. So there's no entrapment.
Right.
And man, he slayed it. I think we arrested 13 or 14 sailors. We had the lab make up some fake dope, and it was like shooting fish in a barrel again. Got to the point, we brought the surveillance van up from Long Beach, and we were just having fun with it. Let's see how close we can set the deal up to the surveillance van. Good stuff, man. And I got Bajana's transfer, and he was happy. That's all he wanted, And it was, and then we did another dope op with another informant they were recruited. We did it out of the Navy Lodge, and that was 1 year, and it was fun. Dwight and I were rooming together, and it was just a great year. And I was just angling. I wanted to get back overseas. So it comes back to what you'd say. You got you had the carrier that you were looking at. So there was a theft issue at the exchange. I was talking to the manager, and she's like, yeah, I came in from Puerto Rico. And I was like, yeah, how was Puerto Rico? And she said, oh, I loved it. And she gives me the whole rundown on it. And I was like, ooh, that's intriguing. And then an opening came up for Puerto Rico, which was Mark Cranfill was on the Haida down there. So, and I knew Brian Stamper from my time in Panama, because we moved from Charleston to Mayport at that point. So I put in for it. Brian gives me a call, and he's like, it says on your thing you speak Spanish. I was like, yeah, I do. He's like, okay, I'm going to have Carlos Campos give you a call, and we're going to see how good your Spanish is. And Carlos Campos gave me a call. We talked in Spanish, and he's like, yeah, you're good to go, John. So they honored the request, but I'd put in also for a carrier, and the two came through at the same time, and they were like, which one do you want? And I was like, I'd rather go to Puerto Rico, because I want to work dope there, and so I got there and had some turnover with Mark Cranfill. Cranny's a great guy, man.
He's a good guy.
Yeah. And so Jeff Morrow was the SAC at the time.
The Terminator.
I call him Little Hands. If you ever shake his hands, you'll notice he has like little baby kindergartner hands. They're soft. They're soft and white. Not a callus on them. Real college boy hands. Cranny, yeah, you're hearing. I hope you listen to this, Cranfill.
Oh, so, I got a ton of Cranfill stories.
Oh, I'm sure you do. As do I. So we had about
Moscow. Moscow is a crazy stuff.
Well, anyway, we had about a 2-month turnover, which was great. I blew up his car. You can ask Cranfill about that one. Literally, I blew it up, because mine hadn't come in yet. But anyways, so they were doing some real good stuff in Puerto Rico. And Cranny actually visited me in Panama when I was on Panama Jack. So, because he was doing the Haida in Puerto Rico, and he came over for a visit. And, he's a great guy, operator, super proactive. And, Jeff Morrow was the SAC. He was the first SAC, and then Joe Kennedy came in. Jeff was there my first year. It was a 2-year tour. I loved it so much I extended a year. Loved it so much more. I actually met my wife there, and she came back here and we got married. So it was just fun work, and a lot of good travel too, because they needed that ATFP support through the Southcom AOR. So I actually traveled more when I was in Puerto Rico, because they had closed down. Well, Panama had pretty much wound down, and they had one agent in the embassy. That was Ramon Quijano. So, as the base closed down there was a need, a demand signal for our support, for Unitas and other exercises down there. And they're like, well, you speak Spanish, we'll have you go. So we had, so Joe and Jeff were the SACs. Steve Bryant, Troop, he was down there with us. I don't know if you know Steve from Norfolk. He's a pilot as well. We had Cindy Alvarez came in. Ray Cruz was down there. Yeah, it was a good office. We did some good stuff, and it was cool because on the Haida had a plane, and Troop was our pilot. So
is that right?
Yeah, it was a Cessna, and Troop was also an instructor, because at the air station they had a flight, Navy flying school, flying club, and you could rent the planes and take trips if you wanted to. I mean, literally where I lived, I had an ocean view all the way out to St. Thomas. So St. Thomas was about a 30-minute flight in the Cessna. So we would go there back and forth regularly. And so getting back to McSherry. So McSherry came for a visit, and we're all divers. Jeff Morrow, we were all going to take a trip to St. Thomas. And what we decided to do is rent out all you had to do is pay for gas for the planes. And it's
Sure.
like $30 to fill up the tank back then. So we had 2 planes. Troop was one of the pilots. One of our other analysts on the Haida got certified. So he was the other pilot. We pile into the aircraft, and we rent a Via for the weekend in St. Thomas, a long weekend. And it was just spectacular. So one other McSherry story is when Bob transferred from Panama, he transferred like 2 weeks before I did, and he had moved out of his apartment, and he's like, "Hey, can I stay with you?" I was like, yeah, that's fine. It's a couple of weeks, no worries. So Bob, like the first morning when I wake up, Bob walks out, he takes a shower, he walks out, he's got his towel on. I'm eating my oatmeal at the kitchen table. And the thing is, Bob's towel was around his neck. And, and I'm like, Bob, for God's sake, cover yourself up. Your girlfriend may find this attractive, but it's repulsive to me. And he's like, well, you know what, Johnny, I always walk around naked in my house. I was like, well, there's your first problem. This ain't your house. Put some damn clothes on. so he grits his teeth, and he goes and he puts his clothes on. So
puts a towel around him.
Yeah. So I tell the guys, I was like, here's what's going to happen when we check into the Via. McSherry's going to take a shower, and then he's going to start walking around naked. And I'm going to be ready with a camera. So sure enough, as soon as we check in, he takes a shower, and we've got this balcony. It's a view all the way out to the British Virgin Islands, Tortolas to the left, Drake Passage in front of us, St. John's to the right. He walks out on the balcony with his towel around his neck, leans on the balcony. He's like, I feel like the king surveying my kingdom. I'm behind him with the camera. Click. He doesn't know. So we go about our business, right? And we had a great weekend, did some diving. And then I don't know how I was able to find a place to develop that picture. But before I transferred out of there, I had the print. And I was on a Unitas cruise. I went all through Latin America. So every embassy I stopped in, I had them sign the back of the picture. Defentatashe Bogota, nice ass, all the way through. And then when I finished my trip, I mailed it to Fox, who was at headquarters at the time. So he gets a laugh out of it, signs it, and then he brought it up to the director. The director signed it. And then I asked Mark to mail it to Bob, who was he was in New England at the time. So he gets this card in the mail with this print with all the autographs on it, And so I visited Fletzy on one occasion. Bob had already retired. I think I was at 23, and I went over to Bob's house for a visit, and there he had the picture on the mantle, and it was just a great memory. We all had a good laugh about it, but but I look back at these tours, and it's like the pages of my life are bookmarked by these tours. And whether I hear a song on the radio, it reminds me of where I was, or where I see a vehicle on the street, or a movie on TV, or a certain type of cell phone from a certain area. It's like, that's how I can date it, but it's really neat because I'm still in touch with those core groups from each office, and we're, either emailing or talking on the phone every now and again. And that gets back to the point about the relationships, just absolutely wonderful. So
good people.
Yeah, but I had to weave in the McSherry story.
So that is a great story, and that's Jerry. I had him on the show. He's already done his show, but
I heard that. Yeah,
photograph. So I'm going to be contacting him about this photograph. I want to get a copy of that so I can put. No, I won't do that.
But, you can blur it out.
That'd be awesome.
So one last story. When we were talking about Honduras, so I go into that bar, and there's a Spaniard there. His name is Jose, and he's the cook, and he is just phenomenal.
Chef.
He's a chef, right? And like I said, he just checked out. So, we would go there almost every night. So kind of got to know them. We talked, and we did our 2-3 week deployment, and then departed. And then I from Panama is when I went back to Port Hueneme, then Port Hueneme for my 1 year, and then on to Roosevelt Road, where we're talking about now. And then after Rosie, that's when I wanted to get back to California again. This was back before the MDP process. I saw the only jobs that were available were SSA jobs. At that time, I'd had 10 years on the job, so I was like, "What the heck?"
Yeah, sure.
So I applied, put my name on the list, and got selected. I was on the way to North Island, and then Cliff Link had called me and said again, so it's kind of like Randy Hughes and Pete Ruggiero. They're like, "Hey, John, Mike Tompkins is the SSA in Pendleton, and he lives in San Diego. He'd like to get back to San Diego. Would you be willing to go to Pendleton instead of North Island?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely, no problem." And I said, in fact, I'd really prefer it. Pendleton was always one of those offices I wanted to go to, just because of the ops tempo. So I came into Pendleton instead. And it was 3 years there that were just, an unmatchable learning experience,
Great people at Pendleton, always have been.
Yeah. Great office, great cases. That was like the real deal. Roll up your sleeves, get dirty. I think between Pendleton and Lejeune, those were two special assignments that we had. And
I think Pendleton is amazing because it's primary jurisdiction. We had every case coming through was coming through.
Absolutely. And man, what a great team. So Dan Seamus was the RAC when I came in, and Earl Fenner was the other SSA. And so I came in, I had the North and West office and ops. Talk about great team, and the CID agents that we had assigned to us, phenomenal. And the cases were just unmatchable. And it was a great place to be an SSA, and this was kind of the time we were rolling out the FTA program. I think it started in earnest when probably about midway through my tour there. But, in those years, so then we had the Cole bombing in October of 2000. Then we had 9/11 the next year. And, I remember where I was when those things happened. And that really, I think, changed the trajectory of our agency. And I'd say it was Cole, I think, principally, and then 9/11 afterwards. But we made a hard right turn towards the ATFP mission after Cole.
Sure. Yep.
And I think what that ended up doing is it changed what our newer agents would be exposed to when they came on board. Because for us, when we went overseas, there really was no ATFP. It was, you're working cases, so that became really the focus for the Navy. And I think we threw people at it because we had to. And it's, I had a lot of folks at Pendleton volunteer to go overseas immediately. And some of these folks were still on the FTA thing. And I was like, I can't endorse you because you're just learning the ins and outs of the job. And while I have no doubt you do well, I'm concerned that you will lose that operational foundation if you go too early. Right. But what ended up happening is, many people submitted, they didn't get endorsed, but they got selected because we needed to send people overseas. So, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen another. Kind of my feeling was, I think they maybe would have been better off compelling some of the people who were more senior to go over and do that mission because they had that operational foundation. But again, when you're talking people who have already transferred 2 or 3 times, there's a fairness thing in there. So, that was the calculus, and we did what we needed to do. But
well, you did a couple of those interesting SSA jobs, but you end up going back to Panama. Work at
I did. Yeah. So again, the kind of the PCS blues, right? So I did my 3 years at Pendleton, and I came out on the 14 list, and I put in for 14 jobs, didn't get a look, and out comes the list, and Guam was on it, and I figured, well, this will give me something new, my own office, which is different from being at and it wasn't a field office, and we were part of San Diego field office or Southwest field office. So pack up, go to Guam, and did a year there. But because I was on the 14 list, I ended up getting out after 1 year of a 2-year tour, but it wasn't really where I wanted to go. So cool story about Guam. When we landed, Bob McDaniel picks us up at the airport, one of our classmates, so it was so good to reconnect with him. And at that point, we're still kind of reeling from September 11th. We're still reeling from coal. We had hired on the annuitants, and the annuitants were helping us overseas and select locations doing the DSS caseload, the backgrounds. So I had Frank Melia came for a while. I mean, these guys were like, they were power hitters, right? When
they were sacks.
Absolutely, and I mean, these were the guys I was scared of, right? But as you get to know them in that context, it's like, wow, these guys are great. Yeah, so Frank did his tour, just completely kicked ass. Leon Carroll came in, same thing, and then Leon, and he brought his wife Jackie with him. So it was great having them close by, and the kids. That's where the kids really bonded with them, and then. He got the job offer from the TV production company, and then John Davies came in to replace Leon. So this is where the John Davies story comes in. So, John Davies and Leon and Frank, these guys were in before all of the agents, and they stayed later.
And that was kind of their model.
Yeah, absolutely. So
we will work more than we will work.
So one evening, it was just me and John Davies in the office, and we got to talking. And I said, John, I really appreciate your contribution here. And he's like, no, it's good for me. It's a wonderful opportunity. And I said, John, you and I started out on the wrong foot. He's like, what do you mean? So what had happened when Dave Swindle was the SAC, I had recently arrived to Long Beach from Port Hueneme, and we had this just convoluted 7N case that was very complex, and it would have taken me probably a 3 or 4 pages to write an ALS to tie everything together to have one interview conducted with all of these crazy relationships. So I said, Dave, I think it would be more effective if I just went down, made the trip down there to do this. He's like, yeah, okay, that's fine. I'll call John Davies, work it out. So I show up wearing jeans and a t-shirt.
Oh, I've got this. Oh my goodness.
And John didn't say anything to me.
No, he didn't.
And I did my interview and I left and I drove back up to LA. And the next morning, Dave calls me into the office. Hey, John Davies was very upset the way you were dressed. And I was like, and I'd heard, because Clark used to work in Davies' office. He would get upset if they had their top button unbuttoned before lunchtime.
There is an email out there that said you will not unbutton your top button until noon.
Yeah, that's it. And so I kind of suspected it was. And Dave was so gracious. He's like, "No worries, John." He's like, I need you to dress that way. It ain't a big deal. And so when I'm talking to John Davies in Guam, 10 years later, I tell him this story.
What does he say? What did he say?
He says, "You know what, John? I was pretty uptight back then."
You know what, John? I got to tell you, I had the same scenario happen to me with John Davies. I went over there to brief the XO on a dark narcotics case. I went in there to pay my respects to Mr. Davies and the 11NC crew. You there?
That's right. That's right.
And I get back to 11ND, 32nd Street. I get called in by Art Hymans, brings me in the office and says, "Hey, Mr. Davies was really upset on how you were dressed," because I was dressed in t-shirt and jeans as well. I was like, "Oh my God!" I had the same conversation with him. I said, after he left NC and went to HQ, 11 HQ, he was doing inspection stuff. For the RDO. And I had the same conversation with we started on the same off on the foot. I came over there and you were upset, and he goes, I guess I was kind of a dick back then.
What a great guy though, man. It was so cool to have that conversation with him, because I remember when Leininger came up to Long Beach, he was just crying the blues. And you remember Rick Benjamin? He was like,
Rick, of course.
So he was in Clark's class, and it was like him and Leslie and Rick were the new agents there. And he's like, Rick couldn't take it anymore. He resigned and went somewhere else. You know what I mean? So
sure
yeah. Leslie did too, right?
Oh, we
so,
lost.
Clark did. Yeah, I don't know where Rick went, but but those are those were generational things, right?
Yeah, sure.
So and I'm sure
it's so funny because we had this one agent. I'll remember his name, Nick Bassimi.
Oh yeah, I remember Nick. Yes.
So Nick would go in there and he would not polish his shoes
just to tee him up,
just to see if he would notice.
John, if we're watching, we love you, man.
And yeah, exactly, John. Anyway, but John would sit there and go, those shoes are an abortion. Nick would, and he goes, he's reviewing his cases.
Yeah.
Nick, where are your case notes on this case? And he would go right here.
Just kick that anthill, man. Kick that anthill.
Nick was fired.
Yeah. Well.
Soon after that, unfortunately, I mean, he lost.
Yeah.
But he was a good guy, but he didn't take the job.
Yeah. Right. No, I'm telling you, that was a classic group, man. Remember Joe Nyland, Go Joe, right?
Oh yeah.
Joe was, and I ran into Joe in Baghdad.
Yeah.
And then again in DC.
He's got a book out now.
Yeah. I correspond with him regularly. Yeah.
Good.
He's a Renaissance man. Love that guy.
He's a good. Yeah. Hey, he would. He another runner at the
right. That's right.
With the Baker to Vegas. So
22nd place, baby.
That's right, baby.
I didn't realize that was a big deal, but it was.
It is
like a couple hundred teams.
Because we competed in, there was no
open division
subgroups back in those days.
Right. Not that like 55 and over with a hip replacement group. Yeah.
Oh man, good times.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're still in Guam, and
so Guam was cool. We got hit directly by 2 super typhoons after no typhoons for 7 years, so we get hammered. Thankfully, my bride, being from Puerto Rico, it's like just another day for her. Yeah, and so she was, I think, instrumental in kind of helping some of the other NCIS wives through it. Because it was unpleasant after the second one. The second one was a direct hit and really had a lot of infrastructure fallout as a result, but we weathered the storm. I remember we had our Christmas dinner. There were no lights, no water.
Wow.
We're sitting there in our beach gear because it was sweltering. But those are the memories now. And I got to tell you though, man, the Wagner kids absolutely loved that tour. They're like, Dad, can we go back to Guam? Are you going to get assigned there again? And so I just subscribed to the philosophy, you bloom where you're planted. Nobody in our agency wanted to go there. The only reason I went there is because I didn't get any 14 jobs.
Wow.
And I got shut out. So this is how I got out of Guam. The 14 list comes out, and there's a ton of jobs. I put in for everything. And Okinawa was really where I wanted to go, but I put in for headquarters, and I always wanted to avoid headquarters. I put in for everything. I mean, like 14 jobs, and I don't get anything. People that came out on the next list after me got jobs. So they announced this one job that was not bid on, MPPZ, which is Panama. And I'm like, I don't want to go to a frickin' FPD. I want to be operational. I want to do cases. So I don't put in for it. And Mike Barrett was the SAC in Far East. And, he's like, hey, John, I don't know what happened, but he called, he got some feedback. He's like, well, the feedback I got is, you're on the list and you're a desirable candidate, but you just got to Guam. And Guam's hard to fill, and they want to have you, at least do most, if not all, of your tour before. I was like, big boy rules, got it. Okay, Roger that. And I was enjoying the work there and the environment. So out comes this one lone position, and I'm like, I'm not putting in for that. So Mike Battle at the time was at headquarters, and he gives me a call. He was in 25, and he's like, I still want to call it code 10. He says, hey, Wag, notice you didn't put in for this. You speak Spanish. People are wondering. I'm like, Mike, I love you like a brother, but no friggin' way. I don't want to go to an FPD. He's like, well, let me put it this way. if you don't put in, you're going to get direct and selected. So don't you think it's better to have that volunteer rather than voluntold? I was like, oh, this is being voluntold. He's like, yeah, I know, but I'm just giving you the N2 on this. Figured I'd try to soft sell it. So, I go back and I talk to my bride, and she's like, no, I grew up in Latin America. I don't want to go back there. I want to go to Japan. I want to go to Europe.
Good for her.
I'm like, well, baby, ain't gonna happen. Here's the writing on the wall. She's like, okay. So I put in for it, I get it, and then I'm on the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up, of course, we loved it. So we extended there, did a total of 5 years. It was a 2-year tour. We were able to extend for 3 years. And I was kind of gunning to break Dwight Clayton's record in Marseille. He was there for 10 years. so being in an embassy was a completely different experience, but it was positive because it ended up helping me later on at the SES level tremendously.
Right.
And so
you got to put out that the SES application, which entails almost like a term paper on
my God,
how you fix things. Partnered with people.
Well, and there were plenty of examples, and one of them, actually several of them, could have been from the embassy, and I did write about one of them in particular. But it was interesting because it's a different culture at Department of State, and you see how the State Department really is part of the overall national strategy. With DoD is a huge player there, and when I understood the different things that DoD did to move diplomatic issues, national priorities, through the ambassador and the country team, it was a Harvard education in that
Sure.
We kind of always heard, well, the ambassador to this, the ambassador to that, but after you've been in that environment, now you really understand how they operate and what's important to them. And that helped me not only at the executive level, but also when I was at headquarters dealing with different cases in different countries, and helped me engage with SACs when there were issues in foreign countries. But it was just a phenomenal experience. The kids were in the international school. They all speak Spanish now, and it serves them well to this day.
Sure.
And so the neat thing too is that from my prior assignment there in 93 to 95, again, this was before the internet. One by one, I start running into people who I had worked with before. The first person I ran into was literally as a prosecutor. I was driving into the consulate and I was waiting to go through the security check. He walks right in front of my car. He looks at me, I look at him, and he's like, John, so it was amazing. Right. Mm-hmm. So, and then I, ran into another guy over at an embassy function because he was part of the DEA vetted unit. It's like, when did you get back? And I was like, just a couple months ago, so they connected me up with everybody else. And it was really like the second chapter, and the nice thing is many of these detectives and inspectors had risen into the leadership ranks. So now all of a sudden I have this network of people who can move things for me all the way up to and including their domestic security agency. So, it paid a lot of dividends. And it was just an interesting tour. And I think also, with the number of ship visits we had each year, it was a very important strategic location for Southcom. And then of course with the ship visits come the regular drumbeat of cases, right? The sexual assaults, the death cases. We had 7Hs. We had a couple 7Hs that, whether it was a suicide or natural causes, right? But you still have to go do the scene. And that's where that foundation that we worked in our prior offices came to serve us well, because dealing with the dead body we've done it before. It wasn't our first exposure to it. One thing I want to also mention, I want to go back to Long Beach real quick, was Bert Nakasone, because Bert was our forensic consultant, right, for our region. And the first 7H that I had as a case agent, it was a shooting suicide on a ship. And Bert, I was the duty agent. And I first thing I did was call Bert, because that was our call, the forensic consultant. So Bert answers the phone, and he's like, "Hey, John, I'm up in Los Angeles visiting relatives. I can be there. in 10 minutes. I said, where are you at? He tells me. I was like, yeah, that's close. I was like, Bert, I hate to ask you, but I need you because I'm just feeling a little overwhelmed. We didn't have MCRT back then. So he's like, no problem. I'll be there. And he showed up, and, you know, he worked the scene with me. I had another couple of folks that came in, and it was a Harvard education. Right. And then, you know, so I learned so much doing the scene with him, and not only doing the scene, but here's how you're going to work the case, John. You're not going to do all these things. You're going to be the quarterback. Here's all the list of the things that you're going to do. I'm going to write it out, and we're going to talk about how you do it. And then you're going to assign your colleagues to go do the searches, to go do the records checks, to contact the family, to contact the medical examiner's office, to, you know, do the photographs, do the evidence. And all of a sudden it went from being overwhelming to being manageable. Yeah. And, you know, it was, Bert is awesome, you know, and then I had another case where, again, he came up, and it was you know, just phenomenal watching him work the scene. And that case actually landed on Diane Nelson. I used the maiden names. And that was an autoerotic. And, you know, we had heard about those, but, you know, we heard they existed, but never seen them. And I mean, again, learned so much with Bert, how to deal with a ligature.
Autoerotic where the guy was hanging upside down inside the ship?
Yes.
I remember that one.
Yeah, because he got tangled up in the knot.
Yeah, he was looking at Women's Muscle magazines or something.
No, that was the guy in Panama. That was my second one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember that case though. That's
yeah. But you know, again, just walking through those steps, so it prepared me to be able to deal with anything. And I always thought that was kind of the litmus test to be a GS-13. You should be able to deal with anything that comes through the door.
Yeah.
You may not be able to deal with it expertly, but you'll deal with it correctly, and then know who to reach out to for help.
Well, you remember Doc Peterson, who was
yes,
with the
the ME.
The ME.
He did some work for us at Pendleton.
He tells a story about that case, the upside down case in Long Beach.
Yeah.
And he was pretty upset about not being called to that scene because, you know, Dr. Peterson really loved those.
Yes, right. Yeah, and that was part of the jurisdiction there. So LA County took it, you know, but, you know, and Doc Peterson was great. I mean, that whole Armed Forces Medical Examiner program is money. Absolutely. So, you know, I just, like I said, I want to give Bert a shout out because, you know, I learned so much from him.
He taught all of us.
Yeah. You know, and you were
a Nakasone.
So going back to the AE death in Panama, it was a Naval Academy graduate. You know, when I did the scene, it was McSherry's case, but I did the scene and I wrote the IA. You know, Mark's like, where did you learn to do this? I'm like, Bert Nakasone. You know, he'd never seen an IA like that, and I had one of Bert's from the Stallman case at El Toro. And I kept that in my chapter 25, you know, and that was basically a template for me to follow, you know, and so those are, again, the building blocks. Those are the things that we do that are important. So, but yeah, the embassy was a great experience, and I, you know, at the time I had, I think towards the end of my 5 years, I put in for a 15, didn't get an interview, and then, you know, they had some deployments come up. That's where you and I did the skid deployment, Lee. So I told my wife, I was like, well, you know, I'm thinking about doing this Iraq thing. She's like, what, are you crazy? I'm like, well, no, hear me out. I think at the end of this, there's going to be, you know, two options for me. Either maybe we'll get a mercy extension here and be able to stay longer, or maybe it'll make me more competitive for 15. If we go back to, you know, DC or somewhere else, it'd be better to go as a 15 than a 14. And she's like, okay, you know. So anyways, did it. And it was, again, that was a phenomenal experience. You were there. We were on the skid in Baghdad. Oh, it was just.
Well, Dave Pounder, I have to say this about Dave Pounder, who was the Alpha team boss. I was Bravo team.
Seafoam Dave. And he laughs about that. And I said, John Wagner, man, he had a ponytail, coolest dude. Yeah.
And, you know, he's like, and last time I'd seen you was probably San Diego.
Yeah.
And when you showed up there, and I said, oh man, this is going to be, we had a phenomenal team.
Absolutely.
With John Dixon.
Yep. Yeah.
And of course, with Dave Pounder, he was just phenomenal. Leader of the Alpha team. And we had a great team in Bravo as well.
Yeah. Switched on case officers, man. I mean, it was
Good.
and that was kind of like a, a Harvard education and OFCO, for me as well. But like I said, I go back to ops or ops, and John was great. JD's like, hey, Johnny, I know your background. He's like, I appreciate it. He's like, but ops are ops, and I want your eyes on these because you're coming from a different perspective.
Yep.
When I would come and point out some potential vulnerabilities, like, that makes sense. So it was really, another brick in the wall of experience, right?
Sure.
And that'll, probably lead back into when we, talk about retirement. But it was groundbreaking, and then I think the couple things are, number one, I don't know if you on that one trip down to Basra, we had that incident.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, I'm still in touch with my colleagues from the guard, man. Sergeant First Class Brockway. I think he finally retired as an E9. Love that guy. Love his team. I mean,
that was a good team. And I mean, that was the rollover, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It just gives me chills just thinking about it now. Every time I think about it from time to time. I mean, you talk about, escaping destiny, right? I mean, but everything went according to numbers, right, by the training, So I love those guys. But so that was a good tour. And then, of course, you and I, we made that special visit to Victory when Dave Jr. was there.
Dave Razor's kid.
Yeah. And
I totally forgot about that. That was a good day.
That was. So we went on the hunt for those listening. Dave Racer, him and his wife Sue, they were GS-15s at headquarters at the time, and their son Dave Jr. was a second lieutenant in the Army, and the infantry was one of the striker battalions.
Yep.
And he happened to be over there. So Dave reached out and said, "Hey, here's my boy's unit. Can you find him?" And we did. I think that's my little dog here. And
someone was growling.
I don't know what he growled at, young man.
Hungry?
Yeah, he's my early warning system. Probably a solicitor out there. Oh yeah, he doesn't know I'm on a Zoom call. So, anyways, you and I go over there, and we had to do a little hunting and searching, and we found him. So when we finally found the right hooch, we walk in and we're like, "Hey, we're looking for Dave Racer, Lieutenant Racer." And there was some guy looks at us. Yeah, we're wearing our civvies and we got the badge and the gun, and he's like, he's over there. So his eyes go wide and he walks over like, "Hey, your dad sent us to say hi." And he's like, "Oh."
I mean, his eyes were
yeah.
Like, what have I done? What have I done?
So we took that picture and sent the artifact back to Dave and Sue, which they really appreciated. And they have it to this day, and we joke about it. But Dave Jr. now is a lieutenant colonel.
Is he really?
Yes, he is. He's he's in the DC area there. And it's really neat to see these kids that were, basically born when we were, agents come and grow up and have their own careers now. So
that's crazy. Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear he's done well in the Army.
Yeah. And I'm in touch with Dave regularly. So again, we talk about these people we stay in touch with.
Sure.
And he's in the Austin, Texas area now, him and Sue there, and they've got their daughters there and the grandbabies, and then it's just great to see the pictures because
they're good people, man.
Absolutely.
Such a good guy.
Yeah.
And so is Susan.
Yep.
Love them both.
Yeah. So from Panama, it was kind of the same thing. We did our Iraq tour, which again was just a great experience. Came back, put in for the extension. That was denied. Then I got a call from Mr. Ridley, who's like, "Hey, got to come back to headquarters." I'm like,
time to do your
time. Yeah. And I said, "Well, I don't really want to come back to headquarters." He's like, "Yeah, but we need you, and the time's right. It's time for you to come out." So I'm like, "Okay." So went back and told my wife, who's like, "But Dwight got to stay for 10 years. How come we can't stay?" It's like, "Well, baby, because that's the world we live in." So, okay. God bless her. She's a trooper,
Yeah.
So, and I think also it's important to mention, the spouses are kind of the unsung heroes, because they're the ones that, she had a real good job at the embassy, and now I got to uproot her from that and move. So I understand the, kind of the reluctance to transfer, but, it ended up being a a very valuable tour. I ended up in code 23B. As I said, if I had to go to headquarters, I would have wanted to go there, or maybe the IG. I thought the IG would be a good job. And talking about the racers, it was phenomenal because Sue had just, she was on the 15 list, and I got 23B, and she was 23A, and so we were port and starboard, and it was a great team. I had let's see, Matt Butler was one of my 14s, the division chief. Bert Nakasone, again, we intersected again. I mean, just great, operationally solid people, and not only operationally solid, just good people. Desk officers there. I had Jimmy Lofstrom was one of my 7H officers. Sully was on cold case. Fitz was the SSA for cold case and ops, and then Butler was the division chief for ops, and then Bert had investigations, and it was just, again, a phenomenal tour, and so I was then briefing the director, on the criminal cases every week at the weekly meeting, and so it was always a mad dash on Monday morning to get everything that happened over the weekend. Jillian Bernard, now Rupert, was my DSI desk officer. We had a great team of analysts. Remember, Teresa Willett was there, Anna Kipe, all the names that we came up with, when you had a 7H, and, Anna would send you
23.
Yeah,
Critical.
Yep. Absolutely. So it was really neat to meet those people in person. And then this is where I learned a lot. We talk about the mistakes. I wouldn't even say mistakes, but, I learned at 23, bad cases would find us. And usually it would be by way of a family member making a complaint to their congressman or senator. Yeah, sure. And, then we would go pull the case file, examine it, and realize, there's some mistakes here. And I wouldn't even say mistakes. It was more things that were not done that should have been done.
Yeah.
And I kind of found there would always be reasons why things weren't done, but none of them were really acceptable. There was always a way, to get through it. And, as a result of looking at some of those cases and then going back and engaging, the SACs and the field offices, I was afforded a very unique opportunity to see what went right in some instances, but more frequently what went wrong. And that's when we would really have to engage. And there are cases that came up that, the families needed closure, and we didn't, check all the boxes. And I was talking with a couple guys recently about the Ghana case. There were 2 deaths. It was a overdose case. 2 sailors they pulled in for a port visit. It was before I got to headquarters. I was still in Panama, but New Year's Eve to New Year's Day, they had overnight libo, and 2 sailors wake up dead in their hotel room. And what we found is they had bought what they thought was coke. It was heroin. They snorted it and OD'd. And the European, I think Naples, sent people out to help on the case. And it was one of those cases that the Ghanaians have it. We don't have jurisdiction, but we've got interest, and the Ghanaians pretty much let our agents do whatever needed to be done. And the embassy was involved. They're like, do whatever you need to do. So that was good. But there were a lot of holes that needed to be filled in, a lot of blanks. So the family of one of the deceased made a complaint to Senator Carl Levin, because he was from Michigan. Mm-hmm. So we get the call from Levin's office. They want the case file. So, we print it up, look at it. I look at it, Bert looks at it. Ridley looks at it. And what we would do when those cases would come up, we'd each take the case file home, go home and read it, come back the next day or over the weekend and compare notes. And there were some things that that should have been done that weren't been done. And the reason why they weren't done is because, well, we don't know if we have jurisdiction or ability to do it. And, kind of my philosophy on that was, let's always try to press it and ask. And what I learned is that some of the things weren't asked because they didn't want to upset the host nation. So now we're kind of left with this case that needs some work to be done. And we're not quite sure who's going to do it. So, I kind of made the suggestion, and I talked with the SAC at the time. I was like, hey, I'd propose, I'd like to send Jim Lofstrom and Mike Sullivan to Ghana, and you can send one of your agents from Naples, and let's have them task force this and basically stay there until, because we had leads, we had a solid lead, and we had two witnesses, the two girls who were in the hotel room with the sailor, and they had essentially said, yeah, they bought something from a guy named, Beach Boy was his name, and he hangs out on the beach. That's a lead in a country like Ghana. So I get buy-in, and this is where that embassy piece came in, because I was talking with the SAC, and he's like, well, I don't know if the embassy will let us in. I'm like, I'm fairly certain they will. I think what I would recommend doing is leading with Senator Carl Levin from the Senate Armed Services Committee has a personal interest in this case. He's going to be calling the embassy if we don't get him some answers. And I said, once you communicate that back to the ambassador or the DCM, I'm fairly certain they're going to, not only
on in.
They're yeah. And sure enough, he called me back the next day. He's like, yeah, you were right. Anything you need, and they'll open up the door with the colleagues at the Ghanaian National Police, and that was it. So we sent Jim Lostrom and Sully down there with the agent from Naples, and within 2 weeks they wrapped it up. And that was kind of the lesson, right? When we saw this in our earlier careers. You may have a Navy sailor that something happened out in town, but do we have jurisdiction? Well, maybe not, but we have relationships,
right? And
we leverage those relationships with the police department, with the sheriff's department, with the foreign police, and that's what I would strive to tell our supervisors in the field, or the SACs in the field, and it worked out. So, and that I think is a page from our old playbook. When we first came on, we all heard the stories about our office in the Philippines, how they owned the streets. That was a little bit different because it was a big operational office versus a country where we don't have a presence and we're sending an agent to do, port visit support. But it also gets back to my assessment that when we're sending agents to do the port visit support, it helps if they have that operational background, so they can engage right there on the spot, and start doing what needs to be done for the Navy, for NCIS, for the families, and when that all was wrapped up, we briefed Senator Levin, and it hadn't even been written up because they had called for another briefing, and I remember I went over there with Mark Ridley, and when we met with the senator and his staff, the senator was in this meeting, and we briefed him on what happened. And this still blows my mind to this day. He's like, well, John, I didn't read that in the case file. And I said, well, that's because it's not in the case file yet. We've sent a team. This is all newly developed, and this is what we have. They identified the guy, put a reward out, bingo, right? And he was like, that's really good news. He said, I'm going to tell the family. And he said, I'd like the family to get a briefing from you and your team. And Mark Ridley's like, absolutely. We don't normally do that, but this was a special circumstance. So we hosted them at headquarters, gave them the whole briefing. It was very difficult for them, obviously, but they were happy to get some closure to it, mm-hmm. and that's why we do what we do. That was very satisfying, and I remember when Jim Lostrom came back, I was like, you know what, Jim, I'd give you a big fat kiss on the lips if I didn't think I'd get an HR complaint, but you guys were brilliant. He's like, John, I had a knot in my stomach because, we were so close to doing this, and the Ghanaian police they were not cooperating. It's because we were kind of forced down their throat by the embassy, but we needed their help to find this guy. So I go over to the office with Sully, to the police director, and I thought, I'm going to get kicked out of I'm either going to get what I need, or I'm going to get kicked out of this office and be told to never come back. And he was expecting the bad outcome, the latter. So the Ghanaian police director stood up and said, okay, I'm convinced. You've done a lot of work. We're going to help you find this guy. Brilliant. And when he came back, he's like, John, I was so nervous because you had set these expectations so high on us that I didn't want to fail. I'm like, Jim, it's not I'm setting the expectations because you care. That's why I sent you and Sully, because you guys get results, and but that's what I'm talking about. You have all these team members at your disposal, mm-hmm. So you don't have to go it alone as a case agent. There's help out there. Just like I go back to Bert Nakasone, help me, Bert. And all of a sudden now it's this is manageable. It goes from
I'll tell you,
overwhelming.
Mike Sullivan still talks about that Ghana case. He calls it the time that John Wagner sent the ghetto police.
He always complains. He's like, Wagner, you always send me to the austere locations. I want to go to Paris. I want to go to London. I was like, yeah, Sully, well, people in hell want ice water. I send you where I need you, but I love you, man.
He's a legend. I remember when he came over from Metropolitan PD. He was such a great asset to the organization just for a couple of years back. So
man,
good guy.
That was
still talk to him about once a month. So
I catch him on the email. I'll tell you, Chuck Howard, what a legacy, man. He hired Sully.
Yep.
He hired George Taylor, Tony Porter, all retired MPD homicide detectives. All, and I was fortunate to work with Tony and George at DCWA. But Sully's so funny because he was always, man, cold case is going to get disbanded, John. I was like, Sully, cold case ain't going to get disbanded. I was like, and sometimes I'd walk in and mess with him. I was like, hey, Sully, I was in the director's meeting today. Guess what, man? Bad news on cold case. And he'd just go pale. I was like, oh, Sully, I'm messing with you, man. You're fine.
He was so constantly worried about that. What a great asset.
Absolutely.
All three of those guys. Tony took me out to a fish restaurant in DC. He goes, best fish in DC.
Yep. And, did he take you to the church? The church for the buffet.
I just know that I went to didn't seem like it was a real fish restaurant, but it was good fish.
Man, Tony and George knew every corner of that city, and like every Friday would be our thing. I was like, let's go to lunch, and they'd take me somewhere new. My wife's like, how are you finding these places? Tony and George.
Tony and George, they knew it, baby.
Oh man! And then when we would do the the liaison party at the Naval Academy football game. Mm-hmm. George was in charge of the food, man. So he'd have his guy do the barbecue. It was insane, and those guys are salt of the earth. And, may he rest in peace. Tony passed away. Yeah. But I mean, I loved him like an older brother. Yeah. I mean, those guys were money. And George is working for Maryland State now for the Attorney General over there. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, he's working for Chuck Howard again.
Yeah. Yep.
That's awesome.
Chuck knows talent, so, but, we talk about, so then the transition occurred to go to the field office, and this is all I wanted to do was come back to California. I had my mom here because I was the only child, and she didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to come live with us. So I'm thinking, hey, this is the opportunity. And I had the family meeting when some of the field office positions open up. Pendleton opened, San Diego. I was like, I'd take any one of those. Mm-hmm. And we had the family meeting. My oldest son was in high school at the time. He was a junior, and he's like, Dad, I don't want to leave. Yeah. I mean, I like it where I'm at, and we've moved so much. I'm like, got it. So we stayed. Thankfully, I got DCFO, and that was the next chapter. So I was able to kind of apply some of those strategic lessons that I learned at headquarters, involving that. But one last touch on headquarters before we moved into the field offices. We were tasked to do the counter piracy because we had issues there in Yemen. And what happened is the Navy would kind of get called in when there was an incident, and then next thing you know, they'd have 4, 5, 6 pirates that were interdicted somewhere. And now they have to be taken somewhere, and none of them really involved U.S. flagged vessels. So, it became this conundrum. What do we do with them? We got to find a country to take them, accept the prosecution. The Navy's got to get underway again. So, Mark Ridley had said, hey, I want you to create a counter piracy program, because it's just a matter of time before this happens on a U.S. flagged carrier. And I'm like, okay, great. Where do I start? So I started doing some research, reached out to FBI headquarters, had a meeting with them, and they're like, oh yeah, we would cover it if it was a U.S. flag. And I said, okay, well, here's kind of what I want to do. I think we should, kind of do some planning to get in front of it. And they told me how they were broken down, and then how the U.S. attorneys were set up. So, DC could take it. You have to establish venue. Sure. But most of that part of the area, the CENTCOM and AFRICOM AOR, would fall to Southern District of New York. And then in some instances, it could be EDVA. Maersk, Alabama was headquartered out of Norfolk, but we had relationships with all of the U.S. attorneys, including Maryland. Rod Rosenstein was the U.S. attorney there at the time, and Neil McBride was, Eastern District of Virginia, and Ron Mission was Washington, D.C., which is all just superb partners. So anyways, met with the Bureau, kind of got it sketched out, and then we kind of created our counter piracy task force. So we had an analyst assigned to it. We had an agent afloat that we put out there to specifically work on that. And then we had a plan set up with the Bureau in case there was a case that touched on a U.S. carrier, which shortly after, several months afterwards, is the Maersk Alabama. So thank God, Mark had tasked me to create this program. So now we had something in play. Sure. And the Bureau guys were fantastic. So, we had people in Bahrain who were first folks on the scene. Mm-hmm. The Bureau sent people out from New York, from the JTTF, and then Southern District of New York took the prosecution. So, we had a framework in place. And that was, I think, the important thing. And then the next thing that we discussed was the counter narco terror mission, and that's when we created Operation Riptide, jointly with DEA, ONI, and us. And they immediately had an impact as well, because the Fifth Fleet was out there. They're interdicting DAOs, and now they got a ton or two of hash. What do we do with it? And so now we had a process, and DEA was fantastic. ONI was fantastic. And the first agents I sent were Kurt Perkins, who used to be a DEA agent and came back with us, and Ramon Quijano. Those are two operationally minded agents, and they just slayed it. So instead of just having, by chance, doing seizures, because of things we were doing at the national level, we were getting tips from host nation through the DEA countries. Boom, this DAO, this location, and now we're interdicting and putting a gray hull right on the DAO, and making the seizures and going after known verified bad guys in coordination with the country teams and the embassy. So that's where DEA had a play. And I tell you, it was great to see that get operationalized. So those were, I think, the two big programmatic things that I learned.
I remember having a conversation with, I believe it was Matt Marshall, who was on board the destroyer when the DAO or the mothership came up alongside, or the DAO came along, and they were engaged.
Yeah.
And so a lot of guys were arrested, and that was the conversation. We're going to go into Kenya, we're going to drop these guys off, and they're going to be prosecuted by the District of New York. So the program you set up really worked well because all I was doing at the time was supplying manpower to those missions. Right. And great opportunities for people to work cases that you would not work anywhere else in the world, whether it be Task Force 152, Bahrain. So it was great stuff that y'all set up.
Well, and that was, I think, providing a relevant service to the customer. We talked about the customer. It's like, what do you need, Admiral? I think at the time it was Admiral Howard was the task force commander, Michelle Howard, who later was, VCNO. And, now we're bringing something relevant to the table. But the way we had it broken down is with those agents, like you said, that we deployed, they would send the crew, like the crew stopped, I think, in Kenya. We already had agents there to conduct the interviews, get all the debrief. And this is while Phillips is floating in the lifeboat. So we're able to pass back to the tactical team on the frigate, and also the agents who were going to be doing the crime scene. This is what we got on the lifeboat. This is how many weapons, how much money, et cetera, and how many people. And that informed the tactical operation, and then, the rest is history, right? So they killed two, and they took the other guy into custody, because he came to negotiate. What a knucklehead. But he was the one that was sent to New York. And then we went up with the U.S. attorney in New York, and they're like, hey, John, this is like the first piracy case in like 130 years. We haven't used this maritime statute since then. And he wasn't going to plead guilty. So we're getting ready to go to trial. And this kind of touches on what I do now at my current company, because we make the platform that was doing the surveillance.
Interesting.
Phenomenal footage. So I mean, it all, and that's prosecution exhibit 1. And it was really satisfying. And then ultimately he ended up pleading guilty. I think he got 30 years. But the interviews that our agents did when the ship pulled into port gave us all the intel. And actually, when read the different accounts of it, I mean, it's a compelling story that it's not all captured in the movie, obviously, because they can't, but it really was just kind of a tragedy of missteps that led to Phillips having to get on that lifeboat. But he was a selfless man. He was a leader. He put himself at risk so his crew could be okay. I mean, a hero really in my book. And, they ended up taking him hostage. They were supposed to get on the lifeboat and go when it was done, but they're like, nope, you're not going anywhere. You're staying with us, and that was after, I'll tell it real quick because it's phenomenal. I'll keep it short, but they tied up their dhow alongside the ladder, and then they did their thing. By the time everything was done and they were going to leave, their dhow had flipped over, the skiff had flipped over and sank. So when they go to leave the ship, there's no skiff to get on. And so Captain Phillips says, I will put the skipper's gig in the water and you can take that. They did that. The outboard didn't start.
Oh, boy.
So then he's like, last resort, I'll launch the lifeboat and then you can get on that and go. And that's what he did. So he gets in the thing, they launch it down the chute, starts it, pulls alongside. He turns it over to them. And that's when they're like, you're not going anywhere. So it's really, heroic what he did, to take care of his crew. So, but yeah, we were right in the middle of that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Anyway, so you're DCWA, you get to assign there. And what are some of the major issues that you had to deal with at DCWA while you're the SAC? Yeah.
So, they had a very robust CI program. And I think, most of the CI team was concerned because they knew my background. I had some CI, but it was kind of pegged as a criminal guy. So it came in and had the meeting with them. And I think many of the things that we did in Iraq helped assuage their fears. And, it was really a dynamic operational environment. Greg Highlands was the ops SSA. I had Brian Platt.
Great guy.
Yeah, and David Glover were the investigations and RDA. So we had some really good things going on. But when I took a look at the CI program, it was humming, moving in the right direction. The criminal program was atrophied a little bit. And as I kind of looked at what was going on, and I talked to the agents, there was kind of this feeling of, we're DCWA, this isn't a crim office, nobody really cares. And I was like, that's not quite the case, but thank you for telling me that. Yeah. And so I looked at the cases, I looked at the informants, there were no proactive operations with the exception of Quantico had one that was open and closed, and there were no criminal informants on the book. I had plenty of CI sources that they were effectively using. And as I talked to the teams and the SSAs, it was kind of that outlook. And I was like, ladies and gentlemen, I disagree with you. I think this is an everything office. Every office that we have is an everything office. It is a unique CI office by being in the national capital region. It's almost like being overseas to some extent, but there's work everywhere. And I remember us talking with one agent. I was like, come here, look out this window. And we look out the window. I said, tell me what you see. It's like, I see that helicopter over there, HMX. I see, White House Communications Agency over there. I was like, the one thing you don't see? Opportunity. Opportunity. Because nobody's been doing this type of work, what I'm proposing, and you can do it. Yeah. He's like, but I don't know how. I was like, we're going to teach you. We're going to work to get you the tools, and we're going to help you to understand that. And so when I looked at the sources, we had 2 active criminal sources, and they were both doing white collar stuff. And there were 4 criminal sources who were basically in the stage of pending, trial was pending. So there really wasn't anything active going on. And I challenged the teams and the SSAs to change that around. And it took some people out of their comfort zone, but they were open to learning. And, the good news is on this, after I left, after about 2 years, we were up to 28 criminal sources. We were doing proactive work. We had property cases. We had sexual assault or, an ICAC, children, internet crimes against children position. We were doing some proactive things, and it was nice to see people switched on because we were able to demystify what informants were. Now, one thing that I did also, because we had the opportunity to craft our critical elements under the new PARS system, and all of the SSA's PARS, I put, you will have a requirement to have an active, a tasked human source on your squad.
Yeah.
A tasked human source. So, and what that means is that's a human being that you task to do something that, either led to an investigation being opened, a prosecution, something tangible, not just they said they're selling dope at this, the corner Burger King. So we all, and I said, you're not going to be in this alone. I'm going to also have that in my PARs. So your success, my success depends on your success. And then what we're going to do for all of your agents, with the exception of the sexual assault agents, because they're not really working sources.
Yeah.
We're going to put that requirement in. So, and all you need to be successful is one of your agents on your squad or in your RA has to have one productive source. That's achievable in a 12-month period.
Easy. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And, but they didn't think it was easy. And so I said, but we're in this together. So, I had Mike Kelleher come over. We put on a course on CW utilization, registration, all of that. I walked them through the CNCI process. One of the things I found, the crim agents didn't carry CNCI, or Triple E, they call it now, right? I'm still using the old terms. And I was like, look, all of you should have some Triple E in your cred case, because you never know when, and here's how you use it. And then we turned the corner. They'd submit the 29s. We'd have to, word submit them a little bit. I was like, this is how you make the justification, and I think also one of the things that kind of hurt us a little bit. Remember when we first came on, you could give an inducement payment to an informant. Sure. That went away. It would just be reward. So I said, there are other ways to do this. Your informant needs gas. Give them $100 for gas, because gas is, you don't need to get the receipt, but tie it to an operation, tie it to a case, and all of a sudden people started seeing these tools that were available to them. But you and I had that coming on. And if you remember, I remember when they gave me my first PN, when I opened it, Harry Rogers, he's going through all the different critical elements. One of them was CWs. Yeah. And I remember Harry saying, John, don't worry about that now. You're GS7. We'll get to that next year. We just want you to learn the basics now. Well, at this point, I've got, everybody's a GS13, so, sure. And it's just because that type of work, they hadn't been exposed to that type of work. A few agents had it. Yeah. Like I said, the team in Quantico was doing it, but largely nobody else. And then once these agents got switched on, man, they were running and gunning, so it was funny because one of the agents, he told me, yeah, I did a few months at Lejeune. That's a criminal office. This isn't a criminal office, Mr. Wagner. I was like, oh, I disagree. It's there. It's there. Just like I said, when you look out that window.
We're some of the best dope cases in DC.
Absolutely. I said, there's a Navy nexus here. Mm-hmm. And, George and Tony were a part of that, helping teach the agents. But I tell you, what a bunch of young switched on people. And when you get your sleeves rolled up and you start working with them, showing them how to do it, it's phenomenal.
Yeah. And then you create a legacy because they teach the ones coming behind.
Thank you. Exactly. And then they become supervisors and have even a bigger impact.
That's right.
And so it was very satisfying at the close of that, before I checked out, I pulled a log and I was like, man, we got 24 CWs. We got people doing things, making a difference, and then so we had a colleague of mine who I worked with on the HIDA, LA County Special Enforcement Bureau. That's their SWAT. I had asked them to come out. Actually, I had them go to FLETC to provide tactical training at our ops course, which they did. I had some CNOA guys go out and also provide some dope training at the ops course. And then I brought them to DC because we created what we called a set special enforcement team. It was back before React and all of that. And really the whole goal of the set was I wanted a team, that could do surveillance, that, criminal cases, fraud cases, could do surveillance on wire intercepts, on a sexual assault type case, CI, national security. We actually had Jasita give them surveillance training during their winter break because nothing was going on at Jasita and we were there. So we do tactical training, entries, buy busts, buy walks, all of that stuff. So when we were doing an op, it was like, if the agent gets the case, he doesn't have to worry, or she doesn't have to worry about getting a team together that knows what they're doing. Now we got this: break glass in case of emergency, deploy the team. And it was phenomenal. It was kind of a full spectrum support team.
Sure.
And I recall we had one case, and Quantico, where it was a Marine who wanted to kidnap and murder a prostitute, an escort that he found online, and he had told another colleague, "Hey, this is what I want to do. You want to get in on this?" That was his fatal flaw, and as we interviewed the witness, he's like, "Yeah, I'll work with you," and he says, "I'm concerned because he said he had the whole plan. I'm gonna tie her up. I'm gonna duct tape her. I'm gonna and he showed me all of these things that he bought to do this, and he had a lady identified, and he had already started that initial contact with her. So we had an imminent safety issue for a person, and we didn't know who she was, and he didn't know who she was. So we were able to take our set team, deploy him down to Quantico right away, put him on the house, and we were able through surveillance to be able to establish PC, get a command authorized search, and go hit his house, which we did, all while our surveillance team had eyes on him because we were concerned he was going to go meet with this woman and carry this crime out with or without this person he had tried to recruit. And you talk about a level of comfort. It's nice just having that team that I could deploy like that. Yeah. And they did. They sat on the house all night. We were able to get the warrant. They go and serve it. What we did is we had the CW meet with him to verify, hey, show me the gun again. He had a 45, and then he came out. He's like, okay, we're going to go do this tonight. And then he gave the signal, and we went in and arrested the guy. So I mean, that to me was just awesome work. So you can't tell me it's not a criminal case or criminal field. Right?
It's interesting. I did time at Quantico as an agent, and some of the most unique and interesting cases I worked were at Quantico. I mean, it's just that kind of stuff where murder for hire, or right. I mean, that's one of the cases I worked down there with murder for hire, where a wife wanted to kill her husband, and it's just a crazy. I mean, you get some really crazy cases out of that place, and it's supposed to be some of the smarter Marines,
right? In the Corps. Marine University, right? Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. But to me, that's exciting work, and they saved a life, but I felt good because I knew this team was safe. And I knew they knew what they were doing because they'd worked together regularly. They'd trained. So I had Larry Swanson and Jerry Plint were the two. They had just retired from LA County Sheriff's Department. And they're like, yeah, we'll come out. So I actually had them stay at the house with me. And we did tactical training for a week, and I was concerned about, active shooter and, all of those things that can happen, to include, you're going to serve a warrant. They did everything. And they made an impact. So, of course, I end up, after my time, I transfer and I go to San Diego to the EAD PAC job. And September 13th, 2013, I'm driving to the office and I hear it on the news. And I immediately get on the phone and talk to Tony Porter, and he tells me what's going on. And then conversely, the same day, which I think Ridley had mentioned it, that was when we were going to brief GDMA to the CNO. And, and because Leonard was just arrested. So we were going to, Washington Navy Yard shooting overshadowed everything, of course. And of course I knew I had one agent assigned in the building. Josh Powell was our rep to NAVC. So I'm concerned, and, I immediately called Tony Porter because it's like, 6 a.m. here, it's 9 a.m. there. This is just unfolding. And Tony's like, John, I'm trying to get over there. Traffic is jammed. I said, but I think Brian is in the building, and I think Ed Martin is in the building, and I know Josh is there. I was like, well, let me know as soon as you hear, So the bottom line is those guys are heroes, man. And and I did talk to a couple of them, and I think I ran into Josh on one of my visits back, and he's like, yeah, that training helped. That training that he gave us helped, because that was just mayhem, and really it's part of the things that Larry and Jerry trained them on is, hey, if it's just you or you and 2 others, you have to learn how to cover through a building and do it safely. Don't run by an open door. Don't, all of these things that we don't think about under the heat of battle, when you get that neurochemical dopamine dump. And, they did just a phenomenal job, absolutely phenomenal job. And I was at the ATAP Threat Management Conference a couple of weeks ago here in Anaheim, and met Lindsay Webster, who was in the building, thankfully survived, and she gave a very compelling presentation at the conference. So I went up and talked to her afterwards, and I was like, "Hey, Lindsay, I really enjoyed your talk. Here's my card. This is who I am." I said, "Do you know Brian Kelly and Ed Martin, Josh?" She's like, "Yes. In fact, we get together regularly and have lunch, and so it's that friendship that was forged, but those are the other serious issues that we can confront in the course of our job. And one thing that I had noticed even at headquarters, you may have seen it, is people walking around without their pistol on, without their handcuffs. And I challenged that at headquarters, and I would always wear it. And people would come up to me and say, "Why are you wearing it?" I said, "Because we're supposed to, policy wise," and one of the things I saw at Washington field office was people walking around unarmed. And I was like, "Where's your?" "Oh, it's in the desk." I was like, I'm going to kind of put a mandate down here. And the requirement is going to be, we're going to follow policy. And I don't want to do it just so we're compliant with policy. I want to do it because it's a safety issue for all of us. Doing what we do, somebody could show up in the lobby, be upset, be disgruntled, have some sort of grievance, and start shooting. Are we ready for that? Mentally, if that happens, are you going to have time to go to your desk and find your firearm and put it on? I mean, these are things that we would talk about just to again have that mindset, that preparation of being in condition yellow, and not being caught flat-footed. Again, things I learned at CNOA, right? That served us well. And so I got all the respect in the world for those agents in the building. They really, and it's like I say, we don't rise to the occasion. We sink to the level of our training, and they did a phenomenal job that day. So. And that leads to EAD PAC, and my twilight tour there, which then I get popped with GDMA. I got briefed in on that. I'm like, holy cow. And, and John Beliveau, the guy that worked for me, who I knew there were some issues with him, on the interpersonal side, I had some reservations and had some serious engagements with him, to try to keep him on track. But the whole, I think, temperature of that office changed when he came in. He was over his head operationally because he hadn't, really been exposed to criminal work. Again, I talk about this career progression to get to where he was. He was Agent of the Year in CT, but he was largely, traveling downrange and developing relationships and doing, that type of work versus ops and investigations. So it was heartbreaking when I learned the extent of what he was at that time allegedly doing. Now he's been convicted, right? And I read through some of the transcripts, and was very disappointed. Very disappointed. It
was a disappointing day, especially for the whole agency. Really. Yeah,
it was a black eye for all of us. But so that consumed, like I said, the last 2.5 years of my existence and or my career with NCIS. But there were other, obviously other things that needed to be done, and it was just a very satisfying position to be in because I could allocate resources, I could make decisions, I could assign people where they needed to be, and it was nice to be able to have the authority to do that. And I could make the justification to the director and the deputy director on what it is I want to do. And it was kind of the culmination of all of those 26 years leading up to it. So
sure. Yeah. I mean, you obviously in a position like that, I mean, you've got half the world you're responsible for.
Yeah.
So that's got to be a challenge for sure.
It is, but I will say on my side of the world, I had 7 field offices with SACs who were just phenomenal. I mean, operation, I had Timmy Reeves and, central field office, right? I mean, I had Tony Cox was in Hawaii before that, I mean, Mark Blanco, Greg Bachman, I mean, and there were others who came, I mean, just these folks knew what they were doing, and so I could just say, hey, look, folks, here's my priorities. If it's a person's case and it's got potential to spin, I expect, and I need your eyes on these cases. Chuck Wormuth at Pendleton, I mean, how can you fail with folks like that on your team? And
he's called Chuck Mr. Manual.
he
he was my mentor. Yeah.
That guy is awesome, right? And so I didn't have to worry about those types of operational missteps. And I saw, this goes back to 23. I saw where Sachs got in trouble by not being engaged and not knowing what was going on in their case files. And I challenge all the Sachs, hey, know what's going on. You can delegate some things, but you have to know what's going on. And sometimes that means you got to crack open case files and read them and give guidance and set the expectations. And what I saw in most of the instances where, those bad cases showed up, the SAC wasn't aware. And when we talked to them, well, I thought my ASAC had it, my SSA had it. And that's what I learned at DCWA. If it was a persons-based crime, I was like, I want to see the case file. I want to talk to the SSA and the ASAC to see where we're at and where we're going, to alleviate that crisis later on down the line. Because, me saying, no, I didn't know about that, that's a failure on my part if I didn't know. And, and that's, I think why we had the success in the PAC AOR. And we had some real good cases, that Crosby 7H that came up. It was a Marine who killed a prostitute in his hotel room in Honolulu, and I remember Dwight was the SAC, and I called him, and this was a high profile case. Honolulu PD was going to take it, and and I talked to Dwight at length about it, and I said, hey man, because we were having like a regular weekly update on it. I'm like, Dwight, this has got potential to go into the stratosphere. He's like, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to send Lou Eliopoulos out. I'd like to get the FC from Okinawa to come in and help your team there. And he's like, I don't think we really need all that. I was like, yeah. I said, I've seen these things go the other way from my time at headquarters. And I was always one to say, hey, if somebody wants to send help, I'm going to take it. And I explained it to that way. He's like, you know what? You put it that way, that makes sense. Send them. And we did. And we basically task forced that case. And again, it was with the idea that HPD is going to take it. The state attorney general is going to take it. Well, they promptly kicked it to the military. So when I was talking with Dwight, he's like, yeah, that ended up being a real good course of action. And we had everything tight for the court martial, so to make matters worse, this person was on that, the POW MIA recovery team out of Pearl Harbor. He had already went to China because they had found remains. So the team was going to recover the remains. So here now I have a homicide suspect in another country, so all of these things were brewing. And that's what I talked to Dwight about the other issues. And he's like, yeah, that makes sense. So, we're talking to PACOM at the time, because they had COG over that mission. And they're like, yeah, we want to get this guy back. We'll create a pretense and have him come back. And sure enough, we did. So it was nice to be able to bring those resources together and not just jam it down someone's throat, but have a conversation to say, hey, this is why I think it's good, and that was very satisfying.
It also has to be, as far as one of those two positions, whether you're Atlantic or you're Pacific, it has to be a great feeling that you have that type of control and you don't have the kind of the meddling from DC.
Right. Well, that's about owning ops, right? And I think, and this is what I would tell people when I was at headquarters, like, look, I'm not calling you because I got nothing to do and I'm looking through this case file and I have questions. I'm calling you because I got a call from the Pentagon, or I got a call from Congress, and we pulled the case file and I see these vulnerabilities here, and these vulnerabilities put you at risk. They put your EAD at risk. They put all of us at risk at headquarters when we have to brief it. And that was the lesson that I learned. Nobody has all the answers all together, or one person. But when you start getting different minds on these cases, all of a sudden it's like we come up with ideas. I'll leave you one last example from PAC. I did an office visit with Tim Reeves, and he needed to deliver some G cars to an office. So we we kind of caravan. I take one, he takes another, and we stop along the way at the different offices and do an office visit. And one of my goals was to visit every office in my AOR, big or small. I got to almost all of them, but one of them was Meridian, Mississippi. There's one agent office, and I'm there with Tim and the agent. I forget her name, but she was very good. And we got to talking. I was like, well, tell me about your cases. And she's like, oh, here's my case printout. And I'm looking through it. And she said, yeah, we're kind of a transitory base. We support Pensacola to air ops and have a smaller cadre here. I was like, oh, you got a 7H. Tell me about that. She's like, yeah. She gives me the briefing on it. It was a Navy dependent wife who overdosed on her, I think it was like anxiety meds. And she had a history of depression, a history of attempted suicide. So, it sounds like pretty much a slam dunk.
Yeah, sure.
And I said, so with all of that, how come it's still open? It was open like for a year. Yeah. She's like, well, headquarters won't let me close it down. And I was like, well, why? And I said, what happened at the autopsy? Well, the medical examiner on manner of death, it was undetermined. I'm like, what? So of course that's a red flag for me, right? Mm-hmm. And undetermined is not good. So we haven't closed it. Headquarters won't let me close it. And so as I talked to her about the case, it was essentially this enlisted sailor who met this woman online. It was a very short romance. They get married, and it kind of goes downhill from there. She's depressed. She's has these issues, and I asked the agent, what's your thought? She's like, I don't feel good about this, John. There's something there. I just don't know what it is. The family told me he was on this dating website, within days of her dying. And I just don't know what else to do. And I was like, well, how about we do this? When I get back, we'll talk with your SAC, and we'll get Lou Eliopoulos involved and Mike Sullivan and the team at headquarters. And we'll have a skull session on this case, because I think there's some things we can do. And we need to run it by our experts and see what they say. So sure enough, when, I pulled the team together, they had all read the case when we have our first teleconference. Lou had some real good ideas. I'm like, Lou, I want you to go to Gulfport. I want you to take Sully with you, and help this agent, because, I think you need to meet with the ME. Sure enough, he does. And they come back with a punch list of things that we can do, which we do. And, one of the questions I had to the agent, because one of my first cases I worked was a drug overdose, a Navy dentist at Port Hueneme when I was in GS7. And I go to the autopsy. He had overdosed on pills. When they cut him open, you could see the pills in his esophagus. And so I asked the agent before, we had that initial meeting. So overdose, she just got a prescription of 30 pills, a month worth of pills filled 2 days before. So there should have been, like 25 pills, 26 pills. And there were only, I think, 2 or 3 pills left in the bottle. So, but that substance was in her, but it was not seen in the system. So I'm thinking, somebody ground them up, I'm thinking she was poisoned, and sure enough, that's what ended up happening. And as Lou did the forensic work, and then we got Sully in on the interview. He admitted, he's like, she liked Dr. Pepper. I ground up like 5 pills, put it in her Dr. Pepper. She didn't taste it. Ground up, 15 more, put it in, and that was it. She didn't wake up. He admitted it. And this was an agent who had a gut feeling that things weren't going her way. Let's get some resources on it. So, again, my takeaway is we'll send help. Don't be scared to ask for help.
The team.
Yeah. So, like I said, it was a fun run.
Well, that's a great way to close out your time within CIS, because of all the kind of your teamwork mentality on getting things done. And that's it's really kind of what it's all about.
Yeah.
Tell me how that's transferred to your current positions, the CI manager for Global Atomics.
Yeah.
How that works for you on a day-to-day.
Yeah. So, as I came up on, the magic number, right? I figured, well, maybe start looking around, because I really didn't want to go back to headquarters. And anyways, got an interview with General
Global Atomics.
General Atomics. Yeah. So they were looking to create a an insider threat program, which is CI. I mean, insider threat can be anything, right? Just like the Navy exchange case. You're an insider, you got access, you can rip the place off, correct, whether it's stealing classified IP, property, money, whatever. So they were mandated by DSS at the time was their name. Now they're DCSA. The industry, cleared industry, had to have an insider threat program. So they wanted someone that could build the program. So I submitted my resume, got an interview, and this is where it goes back to the program management piece at headquarters. So I was like, I know the tactical things that need to be done. I know what we do for the Navy. We need to have a functional CI program, that's not only focuses on insider threat. We need pre and post travel. We need inquiries. We need liaison. We need to be able to give training to our employees, awareness briefings, so they know what to look for, how to play good defense, how to come back and report, and then we can sure, put an insider threat working group together. And I kind of took the DITMAC model because we were involved in that when I was at 23 before it was called the DITMAC, and so went through that interview process and got hired, and that was in May. Well, I got hired in May of 2015, so it's going on nine and a half years now. But it was a great segue because General Atomics is responsible for EMALS and AAG, the railgun. Those are all programs that I was involved in protecting when I was at DCFO, and sure, so it was very unique opportunity to come in and be on the industry side of this because I knew what the Navy's priorities were, and I knew what the Navy was doing to protect the technology. So it was come into the security department, build the program. I had a good amount of interaction with the Guard Force because they were big reporters for our CI program, much like what we saw with our MPs and our MAs working the gates, right? They would report the Guardian things to us. Hey, there's a person taking photographs of the main gate at North Island or whatever, what have you, and we work with them to be able to have them give us good reports, give us a license plate, give us a description, all of these things. Well, it's much the same way at General Atomics, and nobody was really doing it before. So we just started with those functional services, and I found that the Guard Force was catching a good amount of activity, but they were very poor reporters because they didn't know what to look for. They didn't know how to describe people. They didn't know they needed to get a license plate. It wasn't their fault. Nobody ever trained them. So I started engaging with them on that. And then the director had asked me, hey, we need to get a travel assistance program. We got a lot of people overseas. We need to find a vendor. What did you guys do at NCIS? Because we had CRFO in the deployment office. Somebody gets sick overseas. You've got different ways to deal with it, but usually you're relying on DOD. It's a little bit different when you're a contractor. They'll stabilize you and get you somewhere, but then it's up to you to take care of it. So I started on that. I didn't even know where all my people were. So we didn't have any traveler tracking. So we got a contract in place for all of that and a mass communication tool. So, there's a bombing in Belgium. I can go to my website and I know who's in Belgium and I can send them a message, right? And then I can come back to my folks and say, this is who we got, they're all safe. Kind of what we would see when they'd have the director briefing for CRFO and they talk about the laydown. And when your team would brief that to the director each Monday, I mean, there was a map. We got this many people here, this many people afloat, this is where they're doing, and that's what I wanted for our executives. So I just took a team from the NCIS playbook services we provided to the Navy to bring to my company, and it was well received, and I recall the first foreign travel briefing I gave to the president who's getting ready to go to a PACOM country, got with NCIS, got the threat assessment, broke it down, and I had 15 minutes on his calendar. And as I was briefing him for his trip, I got into all of the areas. Mm-hmm. He's like, John, I've never had a briefing. He said, I've been here for 5 years and nobody has ever given me a briefing like this. Why? And I was like, well, I don't know the answer to that, but all I can tell you is we're trying to build a CI program and this is a part of it. He's like, this is phenomenal. Mm-hmm. I was in his office for an hour, but it gave me an opportunity to talk to ask him, well, tell me about your technologies. What are your priorities? What are your critical programs? And they broke it all down. And now, I get a full, confident, not classified, but here, I'm going to give you this report. These are all the things we're working on now. Here's where I want to be in 10 years. Here's my roadmap to get there. Mm-hmm. And, so that helps me craft my program to protect those assets. So I know what's going on and where the priorities will lay, not only today, but 5 years from now. And it's phenomenal to look back where we're at now as a company, and that we've achieved those goals. That was his strategic vision in the beginning. But it was funny because when I went into his office, there's a sign over his door that says, if you don't count it, it doesn't matter. And that was kind of the stuff we learned when Ridley came into 23 and he was pushing the metrics, man. People were like, what is this? And it all made sense, so it all came full circle about, we have to know where we're expending our man hours, our assets, to be able to allocate them in the right direction, number one. And then number two, to make the pitch to the Navy seniors for funding and resources. So, it was, basically just general business principles that I wouldn't have been exposed to if I wasn't at headquarters. So
right.
Again, real good to transition into industry and be able to use those same skill sets, just in a different environment.
Well, you get one of the things with the Naval Criminal Investigation Association that we talked about at the National Convention was the transition to civilian positions outside of the Department of Navy.
Yeah,
and this is always something, an interesting conversation to have with somebody like you who is ahead of the CI program there at General Atomics. How you've correlated your career with this particular position and provided something that they've never really thought about, and now it's on their minds daily.
Yeah, it is. In fact, they actually wanted to grow the program. And so now, we've hired, I've got 2 full-time CI specialists, and we support the entire enterprise, and we also support the other departments. But, and I've had a lot of conversations with people as they get ready to retire. They'll reach out and I'll talk to them about the job hunt process, the resume process. One thing I did when I was in the process, I had the good fortune to talk to Ted Fahey. Ted was an agent with us that I met him fortuitously in Panama when I was getting ready to transfer from the embassy position. He was at a function, and he came up to me and we started talking. He's like, "Where are you at?" And I told him. He's like, "Oh, I used to work with NIS." And I'm like, "Oh, great, another one of these guys, right?" So he tells me his name, and I was like, "Oh, I heard about you."
Yeah.
And so he was legit. And anyway, so we kind of stayed in touch. And he ended up, at the time, I think he was working for Merck Pharmaceuticals. So when I was in the job hunt and I got the offer, I reached out to him, had a conversation with him. He said, "John, making the transition to industry can be stressful." He said, "But what I will tell you is this: working at NCIS, doing what you did, I came from that environment. You have the skills that you need to succeed in your job in industry. What my advice to you is, number one, be confident that you have the skills and you'll be able to do the job. But number two, the main area I see government or military people fail in industry is they do not take the time to understand their organization, to understand the culture, what makes that company tick, to know the personality of the executives. So my advice to you is, don't go in and start ordering people around.
Yeah.
Learn your environment, learn what's important to the company, learn how they operate, and then how you can be an asset to them." And it was the best advice I could have ever had, because of course I was apprehensive, about am I going to succeed? Because I really wasn't looking for a job per se, but this opportunity came up, and I knew if I didn't take it, it was one of those rare opportunities, because I could stay where I'm at now, have a good job, and have that stability for my family. So it was just that window opened up, because I loved what I was doing at O2P, but I also knew there was an expiration date on that, and at some point the only place for me to go was headquarters. So I opted to make the leap, and it's been, like I said, 9.5 years. I've been exposed to any number of things that I didn't get as an 1811, physical security systems, CCTV, access control, guard contracts, managing the contracts, expenditures, procurement, travel safety, travel assistance, travel insurance, which we work with our HR folks, workplace violence prevention, insider, all of these, so there's just kind of this mishmash of things that that fall to CI, and that's where, so my my big boss is a retired 1811 from a different agency. It's mainly a criminal background. And, when he came to me, he's like, hey, John, I mean, there's a lot of good things happening. What do you think about, you want to bring somebody else on board? Of course, I would like to. He says, well, what do you think? You need another, person doing like what you're doing? I was like, what I really need is an analyst. And that just resonated with me. He's like, you know what? You're right. Analysts made money for us when we were working cases. So they allowed me to do that. And actually, I had a contract analyst that came on board. Our guard company had that capability. So sharp young man. And, at the time he was a Navy E6 reservist until operations specialist, just switched on. So he came in, and now we're doing those briefing products like what we had at MTAC, right? Because he understands that our leadership had never seen anything like that, and so he did well. We were able to bring another operational specialist on. I've got a retired OSI agent that works on my staff. So it's turnkey, so you get the right people in that understand the culture and they make an impact. So it's been a very rewarding transition for me. But I tell people, and if people are listening, if you have questions about the whole transition process, give me a call. We'll talk about your resume and, what should be in it, how the hiring process works in industry. So I have those conversations regularly with colleagues just to kind of, mentor them through. So
that's great advice, John. And I tell you, that's one of the things when I hear people who are coming out, they're getting ready to retire from NCIS and they're like, okay, what am I going to do next?
Right.
It's great to have a guy like yourself that they can reach out to and go, hey, I'm thinking about this. How did you transition? What did you find was successful in your path through with NCIS, and what's working for you now? So that's good stuff. Yeah,
for sure. So, no, it's fantastic.
Well, John, it has been a great. Well, we're almost at 3 hours now, but but that's typically how these go when people, because our careers, every career person I talk is unique, and that's what's so special about NCIS as an organization. When I talk about people who are looking for a career in federal law enforcement, it's why that I am so, I'm just enamored in just, NCIS there's no agency like it. Maybe ONI and CID are getting there. But there's no agency like NCIS.
Well, that's for sure. So we talked about that 7H and, in the DC field office. We worked that jointly with Arlington PD, for a couple different reasons. But when we had a joint agency meeting on it, Danny Murray was the deputy chief at Arlington. And, that's when I first met him. He's like, John, I love working with NCIS. I call you guys the most federal agency there is because you do the same things we do, and I mean, it was a great partnership, Well,
John, and I always tell people the reason why and I've heard that same thing from local PDs. And I think the reason why, when we started as NIS agents, we had no arrest authority. We had to rely many times on working with PDs to get things done.
Yes.
And so it wasn't like we were beggars with badges, but we had to build a relationship with our partners. Right. And I think that is the crucial, even to this day. And I think that's what makes us special. That we have that relationships to this day.
Yes.
With local PDs, look at those state PDs, agencies and federal agencies.
Absolutely. And so that has also transitioned into the private sector with General Atomics. So that's one of my goals, is maintaining relevant relationships with our law enforcement partners. And I can't tell you, I mean, just last week, I had an issue where I needed to call them, on a theft from a vehicle, and man, they jump on it, they get resolution. And again, from the perspective of our, our executives, they're like, we never really had this type of engagement.
Sure.
And so it's relevant to them, again, we are exposed to so much at NCIS, and that goes back to what Ted Fahey told me about. We have a special mission, and that translates into value, for future employers. And it's true. So he gave me that good advice. And again, I think our workforce is tremendous people, and tremendous mission. And I look back. I mean, I left with with a tear in my eye, because that was essentially my whole adult career. That's all I knew, and it was kind of bittersweet leaving, but I knew we had to do the next chapter. So it's been a pleasure talking with you. Now, I want to do one footnote if I can. I know I'm going on, and people who heard me talk a mile hands know this too. But I mentioned that op in Honduras where I met the chef. Okay. So that was 1995. 1999, I'm on a mission supporting Unitas, doing the ATFP for it, and they circumnavigate the coast of Latin America, literally go all the way around from Pacific to Atlantic. So I'm hopping ahead of the ships before they come in, doing the advance. So one of the stops was Ecuador, Manta, Ecuador, and at small port town on the Pacific coast. And I roll into town. I check into the hotel. I got a couple of CI Marines with me. I ask the front desk concierge, hey, where can we get a bite to eat? She recommends this place called the Ipanema Cafe. You probably saw it coming into town. I was like, yeah, I saw it on the right side. And she said, they got pretty good food there. So like, okay. So we stow our gear, meet in the lobby, get in the rental car, and drive over there. And it's this kind of outdoor cafe, thatch roof setup. They've got a bar, a pool table. They've got a kitchen in the back. And, we order some drinks, and we start playing pool, waiting for the food to come out. And I go up to the bar, and it was a Brazilian guy that owned the place, and he had moved to Ecuador, married a gal there. So we get to talking, and, we go back to playing pool. But as I'm talking to him at the bar, getting my drink, I see this guy in the kitchen, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him. And I look back, and he's still looking, and I was like, this is weird, but I didn't put two and two. So I go back, we finish our pool game, and then the food's ready. And then he walks out of the kitchen, and he's like, Honduras, 1995. Usted estaba con los buzos. I'll translate. He's like, Honduras, 1995. You were with the divers. I'm like, Jose, John, what are the odds?
I thought I was in a scene of Sicario just a second ago.
So, yeah, you talk about happenstance. And he said, yeah, the Brit's name was John, the one that owned the bar in Honduras. He's like, yeah, he ran into some legal issues. He had like a 17-year-old girlfriend or 16-year-old girlfriend. So he's like, I just decided I'm getting out of here. And I came to Ecuador. I knew someone here in the city. I came here, and then I started working for, the owner of the cafe. I'm like, what are the odds?
That's amazing.
What are the odds? Yeah.
The people you meet.
Yeah.
Crazy. That is funny. And I love your Spanish accent, man. It did seem like a scene from Sicario.
But I know now when my wife is angry, I can understand her. And also, when I watch I Love Lucy, I know what Ricky was saying now.
Well, I mean, it's funny because Kathy went to immersion school in Spanish. Yeah. And I remember she comes back from immersion school.
Yeah.
And, you had teachers that had the Mexican dialects, the Cuban dialects, the Puerto Rican dialects, the Spanish dialects. And, all I remember was she was speaking in Spanish when she was talking in her sleep.
That's right. When you're dreaming in that foreign language, you've arrived.
Yeah, it's like what? CCC.
Yeah. But you know what the kicker is? My youngest daughter, she speaks better than me.
Is that right?
Because she grew up with it.
That's awesome.
She grew up with it.
Yeah, our kids forgot everything about Italian language. And, Kathy and I are learning it because we're getting ready to go to Italy. We'll maybe move into Italy here in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
So,
but that's unfortunate. So, I've got my wife here in the house. She speaks. My mother-in-law is with us. So they're surrounded by it. And it's wonderful because it's opened up doors for them with job opportunities. So,
I bet. I bet.
Yeah.
Well, that is awesome. John, it's been great talking.
Oh, man. Yeah. Absolutely.
I really enjoyed this. We need to get together and talk about GDMA on another podcast.
If we can do that on another, and you know what I'd recommend for that, we maybe loop a couple other people in too.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I read.
Recommend a couple of people. Let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you get a chance, or your audience gets a chance, read the book by Craig Whitlock, the Fat Leonard book. It's a phenomenal read. Craig's research is exhaustive. I had a good conversation with him. I didn't talk to him in the course of his research because we had the prosecutions, but I met up with him a couple months ago, and it's a good read. Craig Whitlock.
Whitlock.
Yep.
I'll do
the common spelling. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, it's been great catching up.
Yeah.
This is going to be a great podcast. I'm excited about it. Well, it was great having John on the show today. He was such a good guy to work with and work for. John was the kind of guy who was always a fair leader, and he was a good person that immediately I liked when I first met him back in 1989 when we were at old CI 908. So it was great having John on the show today. He was telling his old stories. I had some good laughs. John is a character. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, like, subscribe, leave your comments below, and we'll see you next time on NCIS Reports from the Field.